Welcome in and welcome back, fellow football fanatics. This is going to be the final live stream of the week, as is usual, on Friday, and we have a lot to discuss. We have bold predictions for the national title game, the final game of the 2025 season. We have reasons why Miami can pull off the upset. We have reasons why I'm convinced Indiana is not going to win by 5 scores again, but why I think they'll win by 2, maybe 3 scores. We also have some conversations for 2026. We have some transfer portal news. There's a lot on the table today, a ton on the table, and we also want to discuss the SEC title drought at some point throughout this stream. So there is so much to talk about, so much to discuss. Just make sure that to be tuned in, to be plugged into the world of college football, get elite analysis, statistical analysis that you won't get anywhere else. Make sure that you like, that you subscribe to the channel, that you hit the notification bell. Follow me on my socials. We're College Football with Sam on TikTok, on Instagram, on Twitter. I'm probably more active on Twitter than all the other places, but make sure you're plugged in there. And be active in the live chat. And if you have anything you want to say to me, any news you want to break to me, or any conversations that you might have, feel free to send a super chat in between the segments. I'll get to it. What I will say, we could not fit in the questions from the audience for today's show, but next week we will implement a lot of those questions that you all asked in a Q&A post on my community post section. So also be paying attention in there for any updates I have or anything I'm asking you, or polls. Probably sometime this weekend I'll be releasing a poll asking about your opinions on the game, whether you think Indiana or Miami is going to win. Thank you so much for tuning in. Let's kick this off and get started here by talking about bold predictions for the national championship game first. It's interesting observing this game and comparing it to how two games were talked about for both the Hoosiers and for the Hurricanes. So the Hurricanes were mostly doubted, with rare exception, against Ohio State. And I would say the same thing against Texas A&M too. But they won both of those games. The Hoosiers were doubted in a lot of ways in the Rose Bowl. They won that game. They were universally picked to beat Oregon, and they didn't just beat Oregon, they smashed them. So the public perception around this game is interesting. I think it is more balanced than Indiana versus Oregon. I've been seeing more national heads pick Miami than I saw pick Oregon in the Peach Bowl. So that's interesting. Our bold predictions for the Peach Bowl did hit quite well. We were right that both teams would get pressure and the sack totals would be more balanced, but that Indiana would win the line of scrimmage. We were correct that Dante Moore would have more passing yards than Fernando Mendoza, and that was just because of game flow. Oregon had to pass the football more. They could run the football early, and it kind of had to get away from them because of how the game snowballed, but Oregon, after that first drive, also struggled to run the ball in general. Just Indiana, on the first true drives for each team in that game, Indiana was running the football better. So lots to look into here, but wanted to get to the bold predictions for this game, for the national championship game. Indiana is favored by 8.5 points in the national title game, and our bold predictions segment for specifically the Peach Bowl, but also for the Fiesta Bowl, did quite well. We were correct that Miami would control the lines of scrimmage against Ole Miss. We were correct in the Peach Bowl that Dante Moore would have more passing yards than Mendoza due to the script of the game. We were correct that Indiana would win the lines of scrimmage, that Indiana would hold Oregon to around 100 rushing yards and Oregon would struggle to run. And to circle back to the Fiesta Bowl, we were correct that this would be a back and forth game with multiple lead changes, but ultimately Miami's strength and depth and superior team would prevail. So after two successful bold prediction segments, now we have bold predictions for the national championship game. Again, Indiana's favored by 7.5, 8.5. There are some 9s out there. This game's being played in Hard Rock Stadium. Technically, the home of the Miami Hurricanes. It seems like ticket sales are trending towards Indiana, though. So wouldn't be shocked if it were a 50-50 crowd or if Indiana maybe had a larger presence in this game. But that's off the field. On the field is what matters. And on the field, I think that Indiana is going to get more pressure and get more sacks. That's bold prediction number one. Miami has Ruben Bain Jr., and they have Akeem Mesidor. They also have Marquise Lightfoot, who's a pretty good backup on the defensive end side. Ahmad Moten should be healthy. David Blaze should be healthy. They did sustain some injuries in the defensive line. I don't know if they'll be at full strength there, but they're going to be playing. And that is a lethal defensive line. It is one of the best defensive lines in all of college football. However, statistically, Indiana does have the better pass rush here. When you look at havoc rate on game on paper, Indiana actually outranks Miami there. And while Miami does have this knack for getting sacks, they have over 40 sacks on the season, Indiana does too. You know, they're absent Kellen Wyatt, they're absent Stephen Daly, but Indiana has still found ways to get pressure. I mean, they blew up Oregon's offensive line, which, much like Miami's, has elite size, is probably much better than Miami on the interior of the line, also worse at tackle, and in some cases you could argue significantly worse. Indiana through 15 games has 45 sacks. Miami has 47. So numbers there are pretty similar. You look at, again, havoc rate with game on paper, and havoc rate are tackles for loss, sacks, stopped plays, passes defended, forced turnovers of any kind. Indiana's third in havoc rate, forcing a 19% havoc rate. Miami is sixth, forcing a 17.4% havoc rate. So pretty balanced here are the pressures, the lines of scrimmage. A lot's being made of online by people backing Miami here, that Miami has this massive edge at the lines of scrimmage. And maybe they're correct. But Oregon, by the same logic that they're using, the size, the NFL caliber, the film, Oregon should have had that same edge too, and they didn't. The size thing held over for Alabama. They got crushed on the lines of scrimmage there. I do agree that Miami's lines of scrimmage is better than Ohio State's. It is better than Alabama's. I do not know with confidence if it's better than Oregon's. I think in pass rush and pass protection, it is. I think in the inside of the offensive and defensive lines, I would probably prefer Oregon's D tackles and Oregon's interior linemen to Miami's there. Again, as I said in a tweet, these teams are different. They run different things. They are not the same, but they do share similar qualities in terms of talent, in terms of size, in terms of the raw NFL production they have, especially along the lines of scrimmage. And again, to point to data, to show you things that you can, see for yourself, information that you can process on your own without any of my input here. Look at these spider charts. Look at these numbers here. Indiana has a decent gain in havoc rate generated versus the havoc rate that Miami allows. That's because Miami is not the most fundamentally sound team. Indiana's defense is the most fundamentally sound defense in America. Landon Tengwall on Twitter noted that D'Angelo Pons has I think it's a 5% or sub 5% missed tackle rate, and he is one of their top tacklers. Their safeties have perfect vision. They know how to bait quarterbacks into throwing ugly interceptions. They do a good job getting pressure with 4, with 5, with 6, and then being solid enough behind that pressure and coverage to make quarterbacks sit in the pocket, progress through their reads, and by the time they found the open receiver, if any, they're sacked. You look at the line yards, the stuff percentage, all those things. The average distance on third down's pretty close, but late down success rate, Indiana wins. They win early downs. They win overall EPA per play. They even have a better explosive play defense, which is one of their weaknesses analytically, than Miami has an explosive play offense. Miami, just based on that, is going to have a hard time moving this football. And when you add on the simulated pressures, And no offense has been able to figure that out whatsoever. Not Ohio State's, not Alabama's, not Oregon's. I'm not trusting a Miami offense that is analytically worse than all of those except for Alabama's to suddenly figure that out. Bold prediction number 2 is Mendoza is clean again. So he does not turn over this football. He had nearly 2 against Oregon. Both were recovered by his own team, conveniently. I think that will be a point of emphasis for him is, hey, do a better job of taking care of the football when you run or when you're in the pocket. Like, don't fumble it. He's done a good job of not making errant throws, and Oregon and Alabama had, along with maybe Ohio State, the most talented secondaries he's played all season long. Miami's is up there. It's close, but it's not quite the same as Zabian Brown at corner and Bray Hubbard at safety, or the same as Dylan Thieneman, Jaden Kennedy, Brandon Finney Jr. I love Keontae Scott. I love him. Keontae Scott is more of a line of scrimmage havoc defensive back. Also great at tackling, hits hard. He's kind of the bell cow of that secondary. But Miami is more so known for their defensive front and linebackers and pressure where you can get them. And you saw this in the regular season. You saw it with Ole Miss with their tight end being open on a lot of those corner routes. You can get them in coverage. You can get them in the secondary. Claire had some open routes that Sayin couldn't hit because Sayin was under pressure. Sayin had a slow release. When things don't operate well, especially Sayin kind of folds up under pressure. That's not Mendoza. Mendoza, you can get him and you can force him to make mistakes, but you're not going to rattle his confidence. So I think he has a clean game yet again, even if the pass protection gets blown up. I think that he will play as well as he reasonably can here. And you see that too with how Indiana's offense is this complete unit really outside of explosive plays, mostly from the ground game. They don't have a lot of home run hitters on the ground because their running backs are not fast. They have good burst. They have good vision. They are not Travion Henderson, Jeremiah Love, Jadarian Price. They're not. They just don't have that one part of the talent equation to give them a lot of home run hitters on the ground. But outside of that, this is the most complete offense in America, and in general it is. We don't have a 2019 LSU offense. We do not have a 2020 Bama offense. We don't even have some of those electric Ryan Day offenses that could do anything, especially if they were healthy. This is the best offense in America, and Fernando Mendoza is a big part of that. He's not the only reason why, but he's a big part of that. And what'll help him too is his receivers have gotten separation on especially Oregon defensive backs, on Ohio State defensive backs too. They should get separation in this game as well. I mean, their passing success rate is amongst the best in America. Sure, they allow a little bit more havoc plays. They like their havoc margin against Miami's defense is a negative here. Miami generates more havoc plays than Indiana prevents them. But everywhere else, this offense, and it mainly focuses around Mendoza and the RPO system, has an edge over this Miami defense here. Indiana will win the line of scrimmage. I think we already thought that based on where I was going with these bold predictions. Their consistency beats Miami's size. It's a big point of emphasis. And another point of emphasis I want to make is Miami's offensive line, when you look at their size, their center, James Brockermeyer, a lot's been made about, Indiana having an undersized D-line, or their O-line, isn't undersized, but it's not huge. Well, James Brockermeyer's under 300 pounds. Matthew McCoy is under 300 pounds. I'm just saying, you can't simply cite Markel Bell and Francis Mauigoa for being over 310 and 6'6" or taller, and then ignore some of the interior stuff. Indiana has, with their speed, with their technique, and their eyes are always on the football. You can't fool them with motion. You quite literally have to be as fundamentally sound as them, as experienced, as quick. You have to do everything they do and then better. And Miami, I just don't think is that on the lines of scrimmage. They are one of the best lines of scrimmage in America, but so is Indiana. And I think that Indiana's speed and technique and consistency can beat, especially an offensive line. I think that Miami probably has more of a D line. Miami's D line is the non negotiable here. Their D line over IU's O line is more favorable to them than their O line against this Indiana defensive line, in my opinion. And that's because Indiana's linebackers, safeties, DBs are perfect at tackling, and they can just let their defensive linemen get penetration. They don't over pursue because they're disciplined, and that just racks up TFLs, sacks, busted plays. And then offensively, Carter Smith has been phenomenal. They've been rotating on the right side of the O-line to try to fix some things, and I think it's paid off in the postseason. You look at the overall success rates of these teams, and also just this is very basic, but the sacks they've allowed. Miami has taken 19 sacks. Indiana's taken 22. Miami with Carson Beck is negative 119 sack yards. Indiana has negative 141. Carson Beck, this is a stat from Jake Butt that he told me, he has the least amount of pressures because Miami's pass pro is that good. But on the rare occasion that he is pressured, he has a TD-INT ratio that is 2-to-1 or close to 1-to-1, around there. And he only completes about like 60% of his passes. So Indiana here, not only I think will win the line of scrimmage, they will have an easier time dealing with losing the lines of scrimmage than Miami will. They'll have an easier time doing that, in my opinion. And I think my opinion's backed up by, you look around, you look at the net EPA per play, you look at what it is on offense, what it is on defense, you look at the success rates. You can't have a consistently high success rate if you're always under pressure, if you can't get to the second level in the run game, if you can't, block duo, which Indiana's been using more of, if you can't get your feet across the line of scrimmage. A lot points to Indiana, again, being the better overall team and even being better at things that Miami is good at and wants to use to win. Miami will run for 100. I think that they'll do a much better job running than obviously Alabama did. And I don't think they will put themselves in the same position that Oregon did and get down super, super early to the point where, when you're down 35-7, you can't really run the football. And they did, and they actually got an explosive out of it, but that was essentially in garbage time here. I think Miami will run for around 100 real yards and at least put one real drive together, if not maybe two. Oregon did that early 75-yard drive that took up 7-8 minutes. I think Miami will at least get one of those, a lot of it coming on the ground. However, I don't see them running for 200, 300 yards. They haven't done that all season long because they don't get explosives really on the ground. They did against A&M once, but A&M is a defense that allows explosives unless they get you into a 3-and-out or sack you. They're a very boomer bust defense. Against Ohio State, they did have some longer runs, but I believe that Indiana on the defensive line is more disciplined. They're faster, and I honestly think that they're more technically sound than Ohio State is. They have a better defense and efficiency. They're a better tackling team than Ohio State, at least overall, compared to how Ohio State played in that Cotton Bowl. Some of the stuff that Ohio State did in that Cotton Bowl, it's not to take away from Miami's win, but there were some uncharacteristic mistakes or things that happened with Ohio State in that game that I can chalk some of them to Miami, like the lines of scrimmage win, Miami dominating them in pass rush. Some of the fundamental errors, or Ohio State always putting Arvell Reese in a QB spy, and that totally neutralizes him, takes him out of the game. I don't know if I can chalk that up to Miami as much as I can maybe Ohio State missing some things that I don't know if Indiana is going to miss here. And again, to go back to spider charts, which I love because we do them, no one else really does them, and thanks to Game on Paper for providing this information to us on their website. You can access it too and see for yourself, so you don't just have to rely on me telling you. GameOnPaper.com wonderful analysis. You can drown yourself in information there. I think that in the ground game, again, when you look at Indiana's defense, they're in the top. They're in the top quarter percentile in rush EPA per play allowed. Miami is bordering on like 25th percentile or the bottom quartile of EPA per rush attempt. In terms of line yards, Indiana wins there. In terms of stuff percentage, Indiana wins there. Average distance on third down's pretty much tied. It's because IU likes to keep things in front of them, and Miami rarely allows sacks and TFLs because their O-line is damn good. It's interesting, to say the least. Very interesting. And as much as size matters, if that's all you're relying on, and that's not all Miami's relying on. Their tackles are very good. But Indiana has technique down to a T. They have strength down to a T. They have experience down to a T. Miami has experience too. They have all these things, and no one has been able to run on them consistently. No one. Penn State was one of the most successful at running on them, and a third to half of their yardage came on one long run that was due to Indiana's safety running into a referee. And that Indiana team was banged up and had played like 7 straight games or 6 straight games or something very close to that with a normal calendar. That's not this Indiana team. So Miami can't 2023 Michigan this Indiana defense. Beck is going to have to be on target, play a perfect game, and on top of that, they're probably going to have to move Indiana for more than one drive in order to have a shot to win this thing. And my final bold prediction is that Indiana wins by around 14. I think it's going to be a 2-3 score win. No, I'm not going to pick a 30-plus point win if that happens. Would I be extremely shocked? No, because I've seen it happen 2 times in a row. Would I also be shocked if Miami covered this thing and made it close, maybe even snuck out a win? I mean, I've seen everything, so not necessarily either. But Indiana is the better team here. They're favored by 8.5. A lot of models will tell you that that's a discounted line. Like FPI will tell you that's a discount. S&P Plus will tell you that's a discount. FEI will tell you that that's around accurate. So I understand that Pate's model, has Miami favored, or not favored, but he's picking them to win, and has Indiana only favored by 5. That's because his model probably cares way more about recruiting than other models. And I think that we need to accept, and maybe I'll be forced to eat my words if Miami wins, especially in the fashion that a lot of pro-Miami people are saying they'll win. I think we have to accept, with how much this team has proven, that they are probably an exception to the rule there, and continuously relying on 4 and 5 stars to say that Indiana will eventually lose this Indiana team might be a foolish endeavor. So I'm convinced Indiana's going to win. I'm convinced they're going to cover. I understand picking Miami to cover, but I guess my final bold prediction is I don't really completely understand why people would be picking Miami to win outside of being contrarian. It feels very contrarian, the way people are saying they're going to win, the way they're describing it. I don't see that. I can see Miami winning, but I think a lot has to go their way in order to win. So those are my bold predictions for the national title game. And now we'll move on to why Indiana will win. We'll specifically talk about that. Let me look at the chat. Indiana better not screw me out of winning 10,000. Well, Anthony Fernandez 137, just because it's an interesting chat. I'm not slandering Brockermeyer and saying he's bad. I'm just saying he's not invincible, and in several run blocking snaps that I've seen, you're able to move him back, and that could mess up a Miami game plan that, look, is going to be predicated on running the ball. You are not going to drop back and pass against this Indiana defense with the style of offense Miami runs. They're not going to. Will Beck be better protected than Sayan was? Yeah. Does he have Sayan's receivers? No, he doesn't. And as Beck is trusted with the offense as Sayan was, I don't think so. For example, just looking. I'm just reading your comments. 1,000 at Miami at minus 2.5. I mean, yeah. I that's bold. It's a risk. I don't think you're gonna win, but maybe you will. If Miami wins, I'll be happy for you. Um. Oh, that was directed to you. Okay. Okay. Just making sure. Yeah, I will say that public perception really doesn't matter in games. It can because public loses more often than wins. But the public perception here, while is still very strongly Indiana, it's more Miami than it was with Oregon. Like the public perception is that Oregon didn't really have a chance and they were somehow correct. Here, I've seen a good chunk of people not even like pro Miami, and some people who are like, I guess you could call sharps, but they're so public with their picks that they're probably a part of the public, even if they bet a large amount of money on things or are national. I think that public perception here is somewhat more balanced, personally. But that's just me, and again, that doesn't really matter. Like everyone could be on Miami public, and they could still win. It wouldn't change my mind at all. Just mentioning that because I see people saying that Miami has no chance, and I think there was some accuracy with that about Oregon. I don't really see that here. But anyway, we'll talk about Miami more later. In fact, after this segment, where I'll discuss why I think they can win. But I want to get to why Indiana will control Miami, in my opinion, first. Here's why the Indiana Hoosiers are going to control the Miami Hurricanes in the national title game and win by 2 to 3 scores. I have immense respect for Miami, but Indiana's favored by 8.5, and with how they've continued to defy previous college football axioms, and remember, rules always have some exceptions, and we ought to recognize when there is an exception to the rule, I believe you're getting Indiana at kind of a discount here. So let's dive into why that is. First and foremost, Indiana has a superior staff here. Kurt Cignetti's staff is better than Mario Cristobal's, and I don't think that anyone's going to debate that. If you're going to debate me that, and yet you're going to cite, for example, that Miami has, higher talent and their lines of scrimmage is elite and that's why they're going to win, then you're basically telling me that Miami is the better roster and that's why they should win. And Cignetti has so far to this point done more this year, he and his staff have, and has done more in the past 2 years than Cristobal's staff has. Indiana makes wonderful in-game adjustments. They tackle at a high level. They play hard at a high level. They are strong. They are fast. Their receivers get separation on defensive backs. Their defensive backs are very sticky in coverage and read quarterback's eyes like a book. These are things that stem from an elite staff, from elite coaching. So Indiana has the superior staff here. That, on top of being favored, will go a long way. I mean, I could just end the video there. Superior staff, and they're favored this late in the year. Usually you don't see upsets where that's the case. Unless, again, there's an exception to the rule or one team has a couple of non-negotiables, not just one. Number two is Indiana has the superior team. And, I mean, hey, maybe Miami wins, and this is proven wrong. But last time I checked, through 15 games, a team that has a 31.7 FPI rating is better than a team with a 22.2 FPI rating. Indiana's first in FPI, FEI, efficiency, S&P Plus, and game control. Miami is anywhere from 4th to 9th in those categories. So again, the analytics, the overall team ratings say that Indiana is the better team here, and they're very clear on that. Reason number 3 is the lines of scrimmage matchup. Indiana should be able to trade blows here. And I think I'm being, in this reason, more generous to Miami because I feel very pro-IU on the lines of scrimmage, actually. This is the best lines of scrimmage that Indiana will face, I think, outside of maybe Oregon, but it is also the best lines of scrimmage that Miami will have played. This offensive line is much better than Ole Miss's, A&M's, or Ohio State's, And the way Indiana's defensive line operates, they're not the biggest D line, but their defensive ends are appropriately sized. Their D tackles, in exchange for being a little bit smaller, are faster, and they kind of play like they're big D tackles too, where they have some strength, they get penetration, they're fundamentally sound and smart on top of that. I think this will be the best lines of scrimmage O-line that Miami has played, and it's going to be close to the best D-line that Miami has played as well. But even if Miami is able to win at a consistent rate here, I think Indiana will be able to trade blows, do enough there to hold up, extend drives, and run the football, protect Fernando Mendoza. There is a sliver of a chance Miami could dominate here. I also think there's a sliver of a chance, and more than a sliver, a decent chunk that with other things happening in this game, the adjustments, the superior overall team, that Indiana could straight up win on the lines of scrimmage here. Number four, fourth reason why Indiana will control Miami, is that technique matters more than size. I am 6'3", 200 and I think 20 or 30 pounds. Now, I'm not in the best of shape, but I am in good enough shape to move heavy objects, to deadlift at a respectable level, to lift weights at a respectable level. But if someone's smaller than me who knows, martial arts and knows where pressure points are, where to strike, and they are faster than me and better conditioned, they can last longer. Not saying at all that Indiana is drastically better conditioned than Miami, but there is something to Indiana's developmental process there, where Miami could outcondition them, but you also have to concede that Indiana could outcondition them as well. The technique, the discipline, say again, I'm fighting someone who's smaller than me, but better coordinated. They know how to throw a punch, and I really do not. That person will beat me. They will put me in a chokehold. They will exhaust me. I will lose. Now, maybe can I somehow with my size, if things line up, can I beat them? Yeah. But technique beats size. Size matters, but only if you can utilize it properly. And Indiana makes it very difficult for their opponents to gain a leg up on them. Indiana's more fundamentally sound at all levels, and that's going to matter here. And that ties in with Indiana's discipline, which is reason number 5. So they're disciplined. We already know they're strong. We already know that they're talented, not in the blue chip ratio way, but in the fact that they have a lot of, 4th, 5th, and third-year players. Some of their second-year players, like Daniel Ndukwe, Charlie Becker, Elijah Hardy, Mario Landino, have stepped up in a big way. They're phenomenal. Let's call it what it is. They are the most complementary football, or they're the best at complementary football and most fundamentally sound team. They are. So that is going to help them tremendously against a team that I think does a great job at complementary football and is very strong, but is more highly penalized, isn't as disciplined, and is more inconsistent at a vast majority of levels, especially the important positions. So quarterback, receiver, in the trenches. Miami's probably more boomer bust in the trenches. IU's more consistent without the same upside, but with a much higher floor. Number 6 is Indiana's RPO system. This can bite them if Miami just gets pressure within 1 or 2 seconds. Just immediately, snap your fingers and they're in the backfield. But even Ohio State was able to have some plays where that didn't happen, and Ohio State's offensive line is pitiful in comparison to Indiana's. Absolutely pitiful. Carter Smith would be the best tackle on both lines. One of Bray Lynch or Drew Evans would be the best guard, even though Luke Montgomery's pretty good. And Pat Coogan is a far better center than Carson Hinsman, at least at a collegiate level. NFL might be different. They'd probably be pretty similar there outside of Smith, who'd be by far the best NFL prospect on both O-lines. Indiana should be able to protect well enough to make Miami's front freeze to decipher whether or not it's a run or a pass, and that plus their receivers and running backs will help Indiana move consistently. Will they never punt? No, I don't think that will happen, but they'll be able to move the football. Reason number 7 is Fernando Mendoza. Mendoza has a 41 to 6 TDI&T ratio, so that is nearly 7 to 1. Carson Beck has a 29 to 11 TDI&T ratio, which is about 2.5, 2.67 to 1, in between 2 and 3 to 1. Carson Beck turns over the football more. He's not as effective rushing the football as Mendoza is. Mendoza is clearly the better quarterback here. And with a 41 to 6 TDI&T ratio, on top of having a better overall team, on top of being inside of that system, I like Miami to hold up better than prior teams. And I hope that I've made that clear even in this video, which is taking the pro-Indiana angle. But they are going to need to play their A game and hope that Mendoza is not throwing with the same accuracy that he did against Oregon and Alabama. Because even when he was under pressure, he was able to get the football out and make some plays. And you can't even have that if you're Miami. Like, if you get pressure on Mendoza, you need him to mess up on his own. You need some things that are outside of your control to go your way, especially at the quarterback position. Number 8's the offensive line. They'll run block well, and I think they'll protect Mendoza at a high enough level to move the football and to create scoring drives. And all of these things with Indiana's style of play, which is similar to Miami's style of play. They both like to go on these long drives. They like to control the clock and have more plays if they're in the lead. But they prefer, ideally, especially if it's a competitive game, to minimize the amount of plays and just be as efficient as possible. I think Indiana's offensive line can help Indiana do that here. Number 9, wide receiver, Elijah Surratt, Omar Cooper Jr., and Charlie Becker. Did you know Indiana has 4 receivers with 400 or more receiving yards? All average 12 yards per reception or more. All have 4 receiving touchdowns or more. 3 of them have 600 or more yards. 2 have 800 or more yards. And on top of that, you have, Riley Nowakowski at tight end, who has 370 receiving yards. All of them block at a high level. They do a really good job on the perimeter blocking. They get downfield. It's a phenomenal wide receiver unit. And yes, I did include tight end in there because we don't really talk about the tight ends in any of these other reasons. Reason number 10 is the defensive line. They hold up at an elite level for their size. You can't run on this team unless you get yards after contact, and that's very difficult to do. Oregon was able to gain line yards on this D-line for one drive, where their O-line was consistently getting 3 to 4 yards downfield. Therefore, they got usually 4 to 5 yards on their runs. After that, even before the game got out of hand, no. Indiana started generating TFLs. They got in the backfield. And, that's with an interior that has Emmanuel Pregnon and that also has Iapani Lololu. That's a better guard and center duo than anything Miami has on the inside there. And Mark Fletcher, great running back, has a lot of power to him. Oregon didn't exactly have that power running back in the Peach Bowl. They missed Jordan Davison. But Indiana also is so good at, being fundamentally sound in tackling that you would prefer to kind of have a Bo Jackson running back who can make people miss and has a quick change of direction to him and has some ability to, make moves. And Fletcher's not that type of back. Fletcher's more of see hole, run through it, and he gets a lot of yards after contact here. That's not a great matchup against the type of rushing defense that Indiana will present. And in terms of pass rush, I like Tyreek Tucker here on the inside to maybe get some pressure up the middle. We'll see what Ndukwe and Kamara can do, but Michael Kamara is also a very productive defensive end. I'd imagine he'd get some pressure in this game. Number 11 is linebacker. Aiden Fisher, Elijah Hardy, and Isaiah Jones. They make tackles. They're good in coverage. They're elite at run defense, elite at tackling, and Aiden Fisher's the quarterback of the defense. He keeps everything in line, and the fact that they have the most fundamentally sound defense is a testament not just to Bryant Haynes and that staff, but to Aiden Fisher and these linebackers as well. whether they're going to get pressure in this game or they're going to tackle at a high level or maybe, force a fumble or a pick. They're going to be a big part of this game and a big part of what should be an Indiana win. Number 12 is defensive back. D'Angelo Pons leads a sticky defensive back group, and I like what I see out of them outside of Pons. Pons obviously can read quarterbacks like a book, make big plays. He's an elite tackler, great in coverage. You can get him one-on-one at times. You can. But you got to remember, think about Davis and Igbinosun, where it's not the exact same, but in 2024, you could get penalties on him. But if you targeted him enough and just kept throwing at him, you'd get a pick, you'd get a big hit, you'd get a momentum play in favor of Ohio State. Mikey Sainer was still at Michigan the year prior. You could burn him here or there, but if you tested him enough, you'd throw a pick. You'd give the opposing offense another possession, or maybe just, give Michigan a defensive touchdown. That's the defensive back that Pons is, and I think he's even better than those two in some instances. He's a fantastic college defensive back. And on top of that, you got Amari Farrell, you got Lewis Moore, who leads the team in interceptions. Devin Boykin has kind of peaked in the college football playoff. I'm excited to see how they match up against a Miami passing offense that is more based on screens, the quick game. They don't go deep often unless it's wide open. They like to nickel and dime you, and I'm curious to see how Indiana's defense deals with that. Special teams. Indiana is better there. I have respect for Miami's field goal kicker, that being Carter Davis. He's 17 of 23. He's made one from over 50 before, but he only makes 73% of his field goals. For Indiana, Brennan Franke is going to be healthy. He's made from 58 before. Radicic is 16 of 17 on field goals, only missed one in the Big Ten title game, makes over 90% of his field goals, all of his extra points. If this comes down to a field goal kicking game, special teams field position, I like what Indiana has to offer there more. That might be controversial because Miami has Malachi Toney, who's a better kick returner, punt returner than anything Indiana has. But Indiana, I believe, is so strong and so good at the fundamentals that they can neutralize that as long as they don't have any major gaffes. 14 is power rushing. And by power rushing, I don't mean the concept. I mean the statistical definition, which is if you need 2 yards to pick up a first down, who's better at that? I think that Indiana can match Miami there. I'm not going to say they're specifically better there because Fletcher's yards after contact, Hemby and Black have something similar. Charmar Brown for Miami, something similar. Both lines of scrimmage, I think, do a good job in those very short yardage situations and preventing TFLs. So I think that, I think that Indiana will do a good job there. And then last but not least is next man up mentality. Indiana has proven in this playoff where, Daly, would they like to have him along with Kellen Wyatt? Yes, but they've also stepped up in a way on depth that is impressive and that reminds you of these championship caliber teams. And again, this is not saying Miami does not have that. But if Miami is going to win as an 8.5-point underdog, which has not happened in a national title game, like an underdog has not won with a spread this large in a national title game since like the BCS era. If that's going to change here, they're going to need more than one area where they have an advantage. They're going to. And you just start looking down the list, and I don't think they have a lot of areas where they have more than one advantage. So those 15 reasons, specifically related to staff, Indiana's lines of scrimmage, their rushing ability, and quarterback play, along with many other things, that's why I believe Indiana will control Miami. Now, why can Miami win this game? The path for Miami to upset Indiana, I think, is a slim and narrow one, but it can be done. And if there's one team who's going to make Indiana uncomfortable in the same way that Iowa did, in the same way that Penn State did, in the same way that Ohio State did, well, Miami's the only team left. So they have to try to find a way to do that. And they have the especially defensive line and offensive line too to maybe generate some potential edges, or at least one potential edge, despite being an 8.5-point underdog. Where this must start for Miami is not just winning the lines of scrimmage, they have to dominate the lines of scrimmage. They have to consistently be doubling up Indiana in TFLs. They have to get an additional line yard or two with their O-line compared to Indiana's offensive line, or more than that. They have to open up some gaping holes and prevent Indiana from doing the same thing. This is not just win the lines of scrimmage by a small margin and you win. You have to do more than that. Carson Beck is an inferior quarterback to Fernando Mendoza. Indiana is deeper at wide receiver than Miami and has better production there, has more immediately ready NFL players there than Miami does. Indiana is just as good, if not better, at tight end, starting tight end than Miami, especially because of Nowakowski's blocking. And Indiana has a statistically superior rushing offense, rushing defense. I mean, they're 8.5-point favorites, and FPI and some of these other metrics say it should be more than that. So you can't just, win a little bit. That might lead to a cover, maybe, but that won't lead to a win. You got to dominate here. Miami has the tools to do that, but I think that will also rely on Indiana having some things that are outside of Miami's control go wrong from Indiana, or for Indiana from the Indiana side. And speaking of that, while Indiana cannot play their A game, you as Miami must bring your A game. You have to play near perfect or perfect, and Indiana cannot do the same, whether that is because of you, whether that is because solely of Indiana, or a mix. More likely than not, it's Indiana messing something up themselves, or it's both. I think if Indiana plays their best possible game in all situations here, they win almost 9 times out of 10, if not 10 times out of 10, if both teams play their A game. Just Indiana is a high-quality team. I'm taking the Miami angle here, and I'm telling you, based on watching these teams, based on the analytics and the power ratings and the historical trends there, Miami needs to bring its A game, especially, I think, on the offensive line. And by that, I mean Miami doesn't generate a ton of explosives on the O-line. They've been more of a power running O-line. They have sometimes struggled at generating a consistent rushing offense. It's not as good as the one they had last year. They need to come alive there in this game, because to move Indiana's offense, and Penn State showed this with some of the explosive runs they had, even though that was an off day for Indiana, was dealing with injuries that day. Running the ball well enough and then beating them lines of scrimmage or matching them on the other side, that's how you beat Indiana or play them competitively. So Miami has to bring their A game and dominate the lines of scrimmage, not just win. Beck must be accurate too. Say the first two things happen. They dominate lines of scrimmage, they bring their A game outside of Carson Beck, and Carson Beck is throwing interceptions and missing guys. Then you've lost. You might cover in this scenario, but you will have lost. Because with how Mendoza is playing in the playoffs, Beck has played well, but Mendoza has played even better, despite probably being under similar pressure. If you count the Ohio State game to say the last 3 games these teams have played in total, he's been under more pressure. And yet he's performed at a much higher level, and so is Indiana's offense overall. Beck needs to have the game of his life here. Or if somehow Miami is running the football much better than IU, stopping the run much better, getting more pressure, he needs to at least do what he did against Ohio State, which was the best game he's had this season, I would argue, where he was able to extend the chains, he made several accurate throws in the money, and even under pressure, he made critical plays and decisions. Don't fall behind is part 4 of this equation. Say Miami starts slow and Indiana starts fast, and then Miami comes alive, you're not going to make Indiana blow a 3-score lead. You're not. You could make them blow a 2-score lead, but that's playing with fire there. The only team to do that was Penn State. Penn State had a massive home field advantage. This will probably be 50-50, might even lean IU based on ticket sales. And Penn State was playing a banged-up Indiana team, especially on the offensive line. And Mendoza this playoff has been playing much better than he did in that game. And again, That was kind of Charlie Becker's coming out party. They did not have Elijah Surratt in that game. Indiana's healthier now than they were in that matchup, and they're a better team than they were in November when using that specific example of the only time they blew a lead like that. You cannot fall behind. If you're Miami, you fall behind because of your style of play. It's going to be very hard for you to catch up. It's going to be easy for Indiana to extend the lead. You need to establish a lead or make it very competitive start to finish and put yourself in a situation where it's a close game in the fourth quarter. And last but not least, this is highly important, highly important. Win the 50-50 plays. Ohio State got pressure on Indiana. They did. Oregon even got some pressure. But even if they got home and even if they didn't win the 50-50 plays, Indiana still probably beats Oregon 8 or 9 times out of 10. Like, even if the turnovers were different, Indiana was clearly better in that game. The Ohio State game's more the reference I want to use. Same with a little bit with Penn State and even Iowa, where the 50-50 plays sometimes went the Hoosiers' way, other times went the other team's way. You have to win those. Say you win the line of scrimmage, but because of your nature of play and Indiana's nature of play, it's a close game. And it comes down to a 50-50 ball. Who do you trust more? The guy who won the Heisman, who has a 7-to-1 TDI-INT ratio, who has Charlie Becker, who's averaging over 20 yards per reception, is 6'4"? Do you trust, and they have Elijah Surratt and Omar Cooper Jr. too. Do you trust that, or do you trust Carson Beck and Malachi Toney? Because Keelan Marion and CJ Daniels are not as good as Indiana's top 3 receivers. They're not. They're probably more comparable to EJ Williams, who's Indiana's number 4. Who do you trust more? You probably trust Indiana more. That needs to change here, where due to certain factors, caused by Miami, caused by Indiana, Miami needs to win these 50-50 plays. They do all of these things, or maybe most of them, then Miami can win. If they don't do the majority of these things, or they only do 3 or 2, certainly 2 or less, they're not winning here. There's a reason they're 8.5-point underdogs, even though I imagine the books are kind of factoring in home field advantage here. Because of the location, because of the travel, you get the whole point. That's why Miami can upset Indiana. I know I probably didn't really state the pro-Miami side here. I did. I tried to. I just genuinely think Indiana right now is in an entirely different tier. So if Miami wins, it's going to be hard and it's going to take a lot. It's not just going to be this one simple thing. It's going to be a variety of things. It's going to be a recipe, not just an ingredient that causes a Miami victory. Now we can talk about some other topics. Before that, just want to pay attention to any of the super chats because I did see that we got one. Hoosier Viking, thank you for the $5 super chat. Paying for a Hoosiers from Sam. Well, since you paid for it, I'm obligated to say it, even though I'm not just by the way, guys, for those of you who don't know, I'm not an Indiana fan. I'm actually a Michigan fan and student. Hoosiers? I probably did that wrong. Probably didn't do it as deep, but I don't want to tire out my voice. So, yeah. It's going to be competitive, I think, at least for a bit early on, and Miami has to make sure that it's competitive for more than a quarter or more than a half, because I will tell you this, guys, the minute Indiana establishes a 2-score lead, it's far from over, but the odds say that the minute Indiana establishes that, they're going to win. Indiana does such a good job at snowballing things. When you can't get ahead of them, their second half adjustments are the best in America. When you can't get ahead of them, when you can't control them, they really begin to just dig into you and tear you apart after the fact. So it's going to be, okay, just texting Chris Drew because him and I are doing something today. Oh, this is such a good show, guys. Such a good show. Okay, let's talk about what's happened to the SEC. I mean, what has happened to the SEC? Indiana wouldn't be undefeated if they played in a real conference like the ACC. That is one of the funniest troll comments I have seen in a minute. That is awesome. That comment deserves a cookie or some type of donation there. What happened to the SEC? They've been absent from the national championship game for 3 seasons in a row. They had Ole Miss representing them in the quarterfinals, who wasn't even a top 5 power rated team. And it seems like the quality of play within the conference has diminished. They still produce great TV ratings. They still own the recruiting rankings, ratings, metrics. They have more talent from high school recruiting services perspectives than anyone else in all of college football. But they're not winning at the highest level. And outside of when they played themselves, they only had one bowl / postseason win this year. That's unheard of. That's crazy. I'm not used to it, and I'm not even an SEC guy. So what's happened, and where are we going to go from here if we're thinking about this from an SEC perspective? Well, let's look at the title games over the past 5 years, and let me say that 5 years, while it feels like a long time, is just a blip in the radar of history. It is less than a 20th of the existence of college football as a sport. It's less than that. In fact, it's probably more like a 40th, or very close to a 40th, or a 30th of college football history has happened within 5 years. Don't know exactly when the sport started. Not going to try to do quick math live because we want to keep everything flowing, but it's something within that range there. In 2022, that was the 2021 national title game, we had Georgia beating Alabama 33-18. That was an all-SEC national title. In 2023, 2 Big Ten teams made the 4-team playoff, but both lost in the semifinals, and Georgia beat TCU 65-7. So just 3 years ago, we had an SEC team that won back-to-back natties. In 2024, Michigan beat Alabama in overtime, and Michigan was Big Ten, Alabama SEC, obviously. We had kind of a Big Ten SEC Part 2 matchup in, I believe that was the Sugar Bowl. Yes, that was the Sugar Bowl in 2024. Washington was going to join the Big Ten. Texas was going to join the SEC the following year. That was their final game in each of their conferences. Washington won 37-31. Either of those games could have went the other way. They just happened to win, and Michigan beat Washington 34-13 to win it all. In 2025, we had one SEC team in the Final Four. That was Texas. They lost to Ohio State 28-14 in a game where Texas never led, but they tied Ohio State at multiple intervals, and at one point were down to the 1 to try to tie it again. Couldn't cash it in there, though. And you also had some big plays in the Ohio State side of things, like the long, Henderson run, or not run, but it was a screen pass, ran it like for 70 yards for a touchdown after the catch, and they had the Jack Sawyer scoop and score. Notre Dame beat Penn State in not overtime, but what was very close to being overtime, 27-24. So in those two scenarios, we were just a little ways away, a few plays here or there, from the SEC having a representative in the national title game. And then for the 2026 national title game, which is for the 2025 season, we have Indiana playing Miami. Indiana beat Oregon, a fellow Big Ten team, 56-22 in the semifinals. So they were always going to be here. Miami beat Ole Miss 31-27 in a game that probably should have been more one-sided in favor of Miami. But if you've watched Miami play this year, you would understand that it is not within their nature to pull ahead of teams by major margins. They usually win by the margins in games where they physically dominate, which is kind of a foot in both camps, both winning one-score games, but you win those one-score games because they're not as close as the score would indicate, if that makes sense. I mean, say Carson Beck doesn't throw one of those good passes on 3rd and long, or he takes a sack there, for example. Then Ole Miss could have been in the national title game. I don't think Ole Miss had the same shot to be in the Natty as, say, Texas did last year or Alabama did 2 years ago, but they were still in the semifinals and they lost 31-27. It wasn't like this blowout loss. So in part, I think some of the conversation is an overreaction. On the other hand, there is some truth to the fact that the SEC is not the same conference it was 5 or 4 years ago. Part of the SEC's problem is a brain drain, where Nick Saban retiring left a hole in the SEC. It did. The SEC does not have the same caliber of coaching that they used to when Saban and Smart were there, when Brian Kelly was there along with them. We'll see how Lane Kiffin does, but Lane Kiffin was in the same conference at Ole Miss. Kelly gets booted out, Kiffin transfers within conference, and they promote Pete Golding to be a first-time ever head coach. You had Sarkisian and Venables in 2024. That was obviously, after Saban retired, but even before that, you at one point, had Dan Mullen, who was probably a better coach than Billy Napier. Just the recruiting thing really screwed him over. You had Heupel, and, we could go all the way back to, before that with, Mark Richt, with Nick Saban, and Les Miles, and Bobby Petrino. And, at one point, Urban Meyer was in that conference. You do not have the same amount of geniuses in the conference that you used to. And on top of that, I think that the SEC's probably relied a bit too much. And this is something that Pate has said. The first part I've been saying for quite a while. I said that well before this year, that the Big Ten has better coaching, that they have better staffs. I thought it was painfully obvious. Something Pate reiterated and brought some insight to, because he's more connected than I am with SEC circles, is that the SEC has been, I think, making a lot of incestuous hires from within their own coaching trees, and they haven't brought in a lot of outside sources, outside perspectives. They've been relying a lot on talent, and it's come to bite them a little bit. You also have to look at the idea that, so I'm not saying I believe in this, but if you believe the SEC is a tougher gauntlet than the Big Ten, if you believe that, then SEC starters will have to play more than Big Ten starters. And more importantly than that, they'll probably get injured at a higher rate because they're playing bigger, faster, stronger players, and they have to play them more often. You can't have it both ways anymore. You used to be able to, because the SEC would stack tons of depth and talent, all Americans in the two deep like at Alabama. So when they played the tougher schedule than the Big Ten schools, it didn't matter because they could reload more effectively too than the Big Ten schools. That canceled out of having to play a tougher schedule. Now, no one can really stack depth anymore at a high, toxically high level to where injuries are almost irrelevant for some schools. Ohio State can't do that anymore. Georgia can't do that anymore. Alabama's the best example. They can't do that anymore. So if you're still playing the tougher schedule than most of the Big Ten, analytics would say that's true. I would generally say that's true, although both conferences from a depth perspective have converged over the past 2-3 seasons. Then you're going to have to deal with the injury thing more than the Big Ten. You can't have it both ways, and I think that's something that's missed in the conversation. If the SEC is a tougher, deeper conference than the Big Ten, because of the modern depth and portal problem, it would actually make sense that that would help neuter their top-end teams, while if the Big Ten's playing easier schedules, that could help foster their top-end teams. Just as an example. Not saying I believe in that, but that could go hand in hand there. As we already mentioned, I think the SEC has inferior coaching, and it's been this way for a while. In 2023, Ryan Day and Jim Harbaugh were, top 4 coaches. And, Kirk Ferentz was up there. They had better assistant staffs, way better assistant staffs that year than Nick Saban had at Alabama. They had better assistant staffs, I think, than Kirby Smart had at Georgia that year. They did. They were better. James Franklin, for as much hate as he gets, and I think deservingly so with how he cratered Penn State's program, his staff in 2023 had a good O-line coach, great defensive staff, elite DC and Manny Diaz, or at least very close to that, and they put a historic defense together that year. And in 2024 and 2025, I think it became even more apparent with, Dan Lanning and his Oregon staff joining the Big Ten, Jed Fish and Washington staff joining, Lincoln Riley and USC's joining, and, Texas and Oklahoma joined, and Texas had an elite staff, but Oklahoma was kind of hit or miss, and Saban retired. So Alabama's staff took kind of a dive. Kelly didn't pan out the way that people thought he would. Pittman didn't pan out at all. Napier never panned out. Shane Beamer hasn't panned out. Mark Stoops regressed. The Big Ten now has a pretty sizable coaching edge and a spending edge. Oregon can outspend anyone in the SEC. Same with Texas Tech. The only school in the SEC who's a recent SEC transplant is Texas that can spend at that level, and maybe Texas A&M. No other school can spend at the level those two can in the SEC. Maybe LSU can come close, but even then, I think that a lot of those southern schools have more of the, the stereotypical local car dealership donors than the Big Ten schools do. Big Ten schools have higher endowments. They usually have bigger alumni bases. They have better academics, which often translates to having people with higher paying jobs that can then circle back and donate, making kind of a life cycle that in this modern era with few spending rules really benefits the top Big Ten teams and hurts, I would say, the SEC teams, especially since the Big Ten teams on top of that have better coaching. The talent migration's real too. We already talked about this. The portal benefits, I would say, the Big Ten with Ohio State, Oregon, Indiana, even Michigan, Penn State. It benefits them more than it does the SEC because the SEC recruits better. So when they lose players, they're on average losing a more talented player out of high school than the Big Ten is in the portal. And the Big Ten's done a better job of scouting, developing, and evaluating players, like in all phases compared to the SEC. So talent is more balanced overall. Still favors the SEC, but not by the same margin. It also doesn't help that Texas Tech has emerged in the Big 12, which is kind of made up for in terms of a spending level and power ratings level Texas's departure, though not entirely. It also doesn't help that Miami is a big spender and player and is kind of taking the place of Clemson in that recruiting area. So there are more programs outside of the SEC that are trying to win titles and operating at peak efficiency than there were actually under Nick Saban. And that combined with Saban's departure and these other factors, it's really like multiple gut punches at once to the SEC. Number 5, though, is I think it's temporary. This isn't going to last forever because nothing lasts forever. The only thing that lasts forever is if you believe there is a God, and then whoever you think is God, I'm Christian, so I think it's Jesus Christ. That's it. That's it. If you believe in God, like that's the only thing that's going to last forever. Football will not. The United States of America won't. Continents even won't, as things have evolved and changed over history. Nations and peoples and languages won't. So why would a state in something like college football last forever? It's not going to. I mean, Saban's dynasty did not last forever. He eventually had to retire. People age. What Cignetti is doing in Indiana, whether because of circumstances involving, him in the football sense or outside of football, he gets too old, has to retire. What he's doing will end. What Ryan Day is doing will end. Even Ohio State, they're the most consistent program since World War II. Their streak of not losing 3 games one day will end. It will. There's a good chance that could be next year or after because 10-2, you get into the playoffs now, and any playoff game is losable. Like it almost ended last year when they won it all. Could have ended this year if the Texas game went differently. Alabama, their long streak of not losing 3 games from 2011 to 2023, it crashed and burned the following year. Things don't last forever. So eventually the SEC will be back. Eventually they will have their heyday. They'll have another golden age as they did under Saban and Meyer and that whole era. The Big Ten, I think, is in their golden age right now. And the question is how the Big Ten is going to take advantage of that. If they will they try to make their lower half members step up? Will they be content with them staying that way? I think that the Big 12 is at a cross in the roads where they could enter their golden age with what Texas Tech is doing and BYU getting some of their money involved. Cycles exist. The SEC went through their peak cycle. They're now going to have to figure some things out. I think all those factors play into the SEC not being as dominant at the national level as they were with Saban. And obviously pre-NIL and transfer portal stuff, but most of that's Saban. I think Saban if not for his age and other things, could have adapted to that style. Because Cignetti has. And Saban's the GOAT, and I think will always be the GOAT. And I want to talk about some college football programs that I think are on the rise. Agent Poshtarine, thank you for the membership for 2 months. Hey, Sam, so glad you're growing. Go Hoosiers from a Buckeye. Love your collab with Chris Drew, Dead Air Sports. Yeah, guys, I'm going to be collaborating with him today, but not on my show. I'm actually going to go on his show. So you'll want to subscribe to, it's Dead Air Sports, to search it up. Black logo with a D and an A, and sports is in the red. Pretty simple logo, pretty effective. Love the branding, love what they do over there. Go over and support that channel, hit the notification bell, because you'll want to get notified when that video is out. It'll also display on my channel too. So if you don't want to do that right now, you'll see the video on my show when it releases, as we'll collaborate. There are new college football players, as in teams, on the rise. College football's entering a new era. It is already in a new era. You can't be left behind. We are seeing several programs get left behind over the course of months and of weeks. We're seeing this live. And I want to talk about some of these new players in the space who are really taking advantage of things and who are going to be here for a while. We have new college football playoff powers, schools that are either powerhouses already or on the precipice, on the line of becoming one. Get used to it, because these programs are going to be here for the long run. They may have been dead recently. They may have been dead right up until this year. They may have been thought to be dead until this year. They may be blue bloods or teams that have claimed blue blood status who just haven't broken through yet, but are showing signs of it. Get used to these teams. We will bring in Indiana. Oh, shoot. That was not what I wanted to bring up. It's my bad. Got to use the show sheet, Sam. Get used to these college football playoff. Get used to these college football playoff programs being consistent national title contenders on an annual basis. These are programs that are blue bloods who just haven't taken that next step, but are showing signs of being in that national title conversation, of approaching winning their first title in quite some time, or even ever, that haven't broken through before. These are programs that maybe even a few years ago were dead in the water, and now they have risen to the top of the sport, to the Mount Everest of the sport. I introduce you to the Indiana Hoosiers, the Miami Hurricanes, the Oregon Ducks, Texas Longhorns, and Notre Dame Fighting Irish. These are programs on the rise. These are emerging powers, and teams that I would not want to play this year, next year, the year after that, or the year after that. These teams will be around, contending, fighting, winning for a while. Now, you never know. Things can always change, but the infrastructure they have, coaching staff they have, their scouting, recruiting, development, their dedication and commitment to the sport is on another level. We already know that Alabama, Georgia, and Ohio State want to win. Clemson's dead, so I'm not even including them in that conversation, even though they plus those three were the big four for much of the later 2010s and for 2020 and maybe the very, very early 2020s. Clemson's dead. Everyone knows Alabama, Georgia, and Ohio State are up there and trying to adapt to the new era the best they can. Who are the new powers that are in that conversation with them and joining them, maybe even replacing some of them? Well, it's Indiana, Miami, Oregon, Texas, and Notre Dame, all of whom have made the playoffs at least this year or last year. Some have made it in both years, like Indiana and Oregon. Miami made it this year. Texas and Notre Dame made it last year. All of these teams have made it, at least this year, to the semifinals. And 3 of them have made it to a national title. Indiana and Miami and Notre Dame have made it to the national title. Miami and Indiana obviously play this Monday for the national title. Notre Dame made it last year but lost to a buzzsaw that was Ohio State. Oregon and Texas made the semifinals. Oregon this year, they made the quarterfinals last year, though, and were the number 1 overall seed. And Texas made it last year. Notre Dame, Miami, and Indiana obviously made the quarterfinals at some point, this year or last year, since they made the national title. Indiana is 3-1 in the CFP, 4-2 versus the FPI top 10 since 2024. In that same time frame, Miami is 3-0 in both the CFP and versus the FPI top 10 all this year. Oregon's 2-2 in the CFP and 3-3 versus the FPI top 10 this year and last year. Texas is 2-1 in the CFP, 0-5 versus the FPI top 10. Several wins versus the top 15, though. They just have not yet broken through against those top-end teams. Curious to see if they can do that this year, but they're so close and recruiting at such a high level and developing at a high enough level, and they're spending, and they're doing a lot of things right to where I think they belong up here. Notre Dame, 3-1 in the CFP, all those wins last year, 3-2 in FPI top 10. Most of them came from last year. They lost one game to the FPI top 10 this year. That was Miami. Texas A&M was just an FPI top 15 team. So they have the resume, they have the recruiting or scouting or development. Recruiting, I think, includes the portal. So they have all of those. They have the coaching, they have the infrastructure, the dedication, the support from their fan base, from their alumni, from donors. They have it all. So let's start off with Indiana and zoom in on them for a few seconds for each program. Indiana, 4 years ago, was a negative 4.2 rated team in FPI, which meant they were a little bit more than a field goal worse than the average FBS team, one of the worst Power 4, Power 5 teams as it was then in 2022, one of the worst in America. They were the same in 2023 when they regressed from 4-8 to 3-9. Their only conference wins in that time frame, the only ones they had, were Michigan State on the road against Mel Tucker, and against Wisconsin at home the following year, Luke Fickell, who honestly has kind of turned Wisconsin into a pretty fickle program, pun intended. They were horrifically inefficient. Overall, portal plus recruiting, they did not have even a top 40 recruiting class. They were not disciplined. They were not fundamentally sound. They were weak. In 2024, they go 11-2. They are a top 10, top 15 team, top 10 in FPI and efficiency. Maybe if you want to adjust for the fact that they could not scale to superior teams in terms of talent, maybe you can just say top 15, but they were certainly top 15, top 10. They were efficient. They had a top 40 overall class. And then you get into 2025 and you have a 15-0 team as of right now with a number 1 rating in FPI, efficiency, S&P plus, FEI, strength of record, game control, average in-game win probability adjusted for opponent, points per play margin. They're only behind Notre Dame, and if Notre Dame played the schedule Indiana did, they'd be behind Indiana. This is the best team in America. Now, it was a top 15 team the year before that, and the year before that it was a below average, bad, horrific FBS team. That is, and you can see it on the graphic, recruiting has trended up, and the efficiency FPI win-loss has dramatically trended up too. They are trending in the right direction, and you can see the split between Tom Allen and Curt Cignetti. That is due to Cignetti and his staff and his model, his methods, his intensity. Landon Tengwall said on his show that Bryant Haynes at JMU made every single one of his players write a 6 to 8 page paper, like a research paper on their weekly opponent, a scouting report that was the size of a research paper. That's insane. So they vet for intelligence, for strength, for dedication, for endurance, for even Curt Cignetti talked about, I think, on the Adam Brenneman show, that they care about flexibility of their athletes' joints so that they can make those moves. They care about every granular detail. It's why they stay healthy. It's why they're conditioned. It's why they're fast. It's why they're favored by 8.5 points to beat Miami and win the national title and be the first ever team in the modern era to go 16-0. That's why. This is a powerhouse. They're here and they're going to be here. If you don't like it, deal with it. It's the same thing with Miami. Miami, under Mario Cristobal, all the past 4 years have been under Cristobal. Their recruiting has stayed about the same, honestly. It has. They've been stacking these top 10, top 15 recruiting classes. And they're high quality, and they're physical, They like to pay for players too, but they like to get some diamonds in the roughs. And the more they've stacked and the more they've developed, you see those trends every year. Every year they're getting better. They're getting better. They got better by about 10 points from 2022 to 2023 when they, blew up everything and started from the ground. Then they improved by close to 7 points, and then they improved by about 5. So they're improving on average by about a touchdown per year. Now, you can't really compare FPI year to year because it's a scale that's only meant to be used for that year. But using efficiency, looking at their games, watching their games in film, especially when the scores are that dramatically different, you can make a reasonable assumption that the teams are getting better year over year because the point difference is not by a fraction. It's clearly evident, especially when they're playing a tougher schedule this year than last year, that they're improving. This is a team trending in the right direction. And Cristobal's motto of, mass kicks butt, to be correct in that regard, that they want to be physical. They don't get much sleep, and that's controversial amongst some, but they stay up much of the night recruiting, coaching, obsessing over their opponents. Cristobal's been undefeated this year against the FPI top 10. They're underdogs to Indiana, but they're playing for a national title this year at 13-2, and they can win it all because the spread's 8.5 in favor of IU, not 21.5. And even then, it's any given Saturday, anything can happen. If they don't win it all this year, I think the odds say they're one of the favorites to win it all in the next 5-10 years, and I do think Cristobal's around for the long haul. This is his dream job. If I were him, I would not leave for any other job. Would never leave. He has it good there, and he's a much better coach than people realize. And he has found a gem of a staff. He also has his best staff this year that he's ever had, not just his best team. So he's evolving as a coach. Miami's evolving as a program. They're here. Oregon's an interesting case. Speaking of Mario Cristobal, he left Dan Lanning with some goods, but was it perfect? I wouldn't say so. No. But Lanning's improved upon where Cristobal left off. Overall, factoring in high school recruiting, factoring in the portal, Oregon's recruiting has improved from where Lanning had it originally and from where Cristobal had it initially. I think the development has gotten better. I think the game management even has improved. I think that Cristobal leaving for Miami and Oregon getting Lanning was a win-win. I think Cristobal better fits what Miami needs, and Lanning fits better what Oregon needs than the other two. So it was a win-win situation. Going from 10-3 to 12-2 to 13-1 to 13-2. They have made progress in terms of the college football playoff every year. They won the Big Ten the first year they were in. I still think Lanning's best team was 2023. They probably weren't as deep as this team from a talent angle, but from a playable depth angle, from a star angle, from an alien angle, even from an offensive line angle. Like, that was the best team Lanning ever had, was that 2023 team that lost to Washington twice, and the playoff was 4 teams, not 12. So they didn't even get to the playoffs. They didn't even get an invite. And I wish the 12-team playoff was implemented a year earlier, so we could have seen, how does Florida State handle, how do they handle that game with, a backup quarterback? How do they handle the playoffs? How does Oregon do with that system? How does Ohio State do? How does Michigan, Alabama do? How does Georgia do? But when you win 10 games 4 years in a row, you're in the national title or playoff conversation all of those years entering November, and entering championship week, you're in it for 3 years in a row. You are a powerhouse, and when you recruit and spend, develop, and coach at the level they do, they're here to stay. Texas. The Longhorns are a kind of similar case study. Now, they immediately improved in recruiting under Sark compared to where Tom Herman had them. You can't see 2021 because we're only doing 4 years, but 8-5, 12-2, 13-3, 10-3, they were on that upward trajectory of constantly being better than they were last year, but progress isn't always linear, and when you get to the point of being a high-level program, you will start to have more of a wave look rather than having just a positive sloped line look. in a year-by-year graphing of how you do in efficiency, FPI, wins, losses, recruiting. You can't always be at the top. Like even Saban, his teams were not always power rated 1. They weren't. One of his best teams in 2010 went 10-3. Stuff just happens. That happened to Texas this year. Recruiting, they're going to sign probably back-to-back number 1 overall classes, factoring in high school and the portal. They are in FPI and efficiency. They were a top 15 team this year. Not quite top 10. They were top 10 in 2023, 2024, top 15 in 2022. And they were in the playoff conversation in 23 and 24. And entering November, they were in 2025 as well. So it's a similar story to Oregon. They just happened to have kind of a down cycle year. And I think that was due to playing a tougher schedule, their toughest under Sark yet, and also having Manning struggle early. The offensive line was really bad this year. The secondary wasn't as good as it was in 2024 when they had the Jim Thorpe Award winner. I think that Texas is still here. Still think they're a team that's on the precipice of being a powerhouse. If not, they're a powerhouse already. And last but not least, we have Notre Dame. Notre Dame is here to stay. I know that if you're a Notre Dame fan, you might be thinking, isn't this the guy who called you soft for opting out of a bowl game? Well, yeah, that was soft. That was a soft decision to opt out of that bowl game, to sacrifice practices, especially when your team is going to have some new pieces, going to need to have some young guys step up. You could have had extra practices, you could have had extra development, and you would have beaten BYU. Pretty sure of that. You didn't. And now, I mean, does it really matter in the long run? I don't know. Probably doesn't matter a whole lot. Might matter a little bit because stuff like that can open up what a program's mentality is and kind of make it public. But I still think this is a physical team that's well coached. They have a good staff. I liked the response to Max Bola leaving for Michigan State. Thought they made good staff additions there. They're recruiting. So this will not have an effect for this coming year, I don't think, outside of the portal additions. This is more of a long-term thing. Freeman, for years it was talked about how he was a better recruiter than Brian Kelly, and you knew it and you could see it, but not very clearly. The casual could say, well, they're still recruiting only 10th, 11th, or 12th. That's not much better than Kelly. Well, this year, factoring in the portal and high school recruiting, they're probably going to have a top 2, if not top 3 overall class. They have more 5-stars than ever before, more 4-stars than ever before. And look, with the way college football's heading and how they've maintained their independence and they're in that agreement with the ACC, in theory, if things go well, if they develop well, if they coach well, if they don't overlook anyone, they should be in the playoffs every year because they should be going 11-1 every year with the schedules they have lined up. 11-1 or better. Their recruiting has never been better. Their win-loss record took a slight dip from where it was in 2024, but they also played a tougher schedule than they did in 2024, and they were a younger team. They lost a lot. And with having A&M and Miami back-to-back to start, that was always going to be a tough opening. According to FPI and efficiency, they were about the same team as last year, if not maybe better. Would be curious to see if that would reign the case if they played a tougher schedule. Their regular season schedule was tougher, but last year they went through a gauntlet with, Indiana, spilled my pen there, Indiana, Georgia, and then they had to play Penn State and Ohio State. I would be curious to see what would have happened if they were in the 12-team playoff, but sadly, because we had to include 2 G5 teams and focused on conference champions rather than just maybe one G5 team to include them, but then, try to get quality after that, we sadly didn't get to see Notre Dame in the playoffs. So that it was the right decision to put Miami in ahead of them, but ideally we would have had Notre Dame in the playoffs as well, and it wouldn't have had to have been an either-or type thing. They have a bright future under Marcus Freeman and their current staff and roster, like what I see out of them. Some honorable mentions here. Emerging powers, we got USC, Texas Tech, and Texas A&M. A&M and Tech, we've just only seen 1 year of them being top end, either top 15 or in the case of Tech, a top 10 team. So I want to see more out of Tech before I declare them a new power. A&M, it's similar. USC, I'd probably have to see more than just 1 year because they haven't really even been all that great under Riley in any year. But the way they've recruited and the way they've built their staff and the progress they made last year tells me that they could be an emerging power. And at least they deserve to be in the honorable mention conversation. Thank you all so much for watching. I know this is controversial, but make sure to comment your thoughts down below on who you think the new powers in college football are, and whether or not they're going to be replacing the old guard. All right. Now we got special team topics. That's what we have next. Oh, nice neck crack there. Okay. I think I need to go to the bathroom because I know we've been live for what? Hour 30? Yep, hour 30. So we're going to take a little bit of a break here. We'll come back, do some special topics that mostly talk about 2026 and beyond, and then we'll hit on the portal really quickly and get it out of here. So I will see you guys very soon. We're probably about halfway through. All right, we're back. There we go. We're back, everyone. So, thank you for tuning in. We're about halfway through, and next up, it's just talking about some special topics in the sport, and from there, yeah, it's onto the portal. So, I firstly entering 2026, I want to focus on a lot of these playoff teams. Teams that made the quarterfinals specifically. All these teams made the quarterfinals, all of them. Most of them, or not most of them, but three of them, because we're talking about seven, made the semifinals, and two of them are obviously playing in the national title, because we're going to touch on Indiana too. But I want to talk about these teams, in some cases as programs, in other cases as teams just entering 2026, because I think depending on the perception of these programs and of these teams, it's interesting to look at maybe the long term versus the short term. With Miami, we're going to look in the long term, so not just this Monday, which we'll touch on a little bit here, but I also want to pay attention to the future of them under Mario Cristobal. I hope, if it hasn't already been made clear to everyone watching this, that Miami is a great program. If you've doubted Miami before, you should stop doing that, at least from a program perspective. Regardless of whether or not Miami wins this Monday, they are a great program, and they are back, and they are setting a standard that will be replicated year over year over year under Mario Cristobal. Now, why is that? Why will they be a serious national title contender every year? Well, it's a variety of things. But while difficult, to a certain degree, it is a pretty simple process. They play complementary football, number one. And what that means is their offense and defense has a high expectation. Excellence is demanded of them. It all starts up front on both units. And when you're fantastic up front on the O-line and D-line, and you have depth, and you're developed well, you're coached well, your coordinators usually, especially on the defensive side of the ball with Corey Heatherman, put you in a position to win, you will be among the 10th percentile or higher of teams, or 90th percentile. Got those mixed up there. That's where you will be. You will be in that top 10% or better. And Miami is there right now. They're actually higher than the top 10% because they're 136 teams. And they're certainly better than, 13th, or maybe it's closer to 140 now. So they're better than the 14th or 13th best team, certainly better than that as a program. They play complementary football. Offense and defense is good. They try on special teams to make that a priority as well. Cristobal is a better coach than a lot of people realize. Go out and make that move and bring in Corey Heatherman, who's brought Miami to being the 5th best scoring defense, the 50th best passing defense in terms of total yards, and they're better than that when you factor in, yards per drop back, when you factor in pass rush, when you factor in the schedule they've gone up against, the 5th best total rushing defense, the 5th defense in points per play, a top 20 defense in yards per pass attempt and yards per rush attempt, number 1 in season sacks, top 10 in season takeaways, and 4th in ESPN's efficiency. You brought him in from Minnesota, where he commanded a top 15, maybe even top 10 defense there, despite their inferior talent to what he had at Miami, or what he has at Miami now. And he worked with Cignetti, who Miami's going to be playing Monday at JMU, did well there, did well at Rutgers as their linebackers coach, and he's growing and evolving as a defensive coordinator and is one of the sharpest defensive minds out there. To make that move is something that only a great head coach could do, and then to have it pan out because he fits with the culture, fits with the expectations, only a great head coach can do that. Cristobal is a great head coach. He has his flaws, for sure, but I'd rather have him than James Franklin. I'd rather have him than a coach that couldn't win the big games. Cristobal occasionally slips up here and there. No, he does not win every big game, but he's done a good job in big games, and he's raised Miami's floor and ceiling by quite a bit, being their best head coach since Butch Davis. I mean, Larry Coker, I know, won a title, but he inherited a wonderful situation. He is Miami's best coach of the 21st century, for sure. And you look at the offensive side of the ball, which regressed from last year, but last year they were number one in a variety of categories or very close to it. This year, they're about a top 25, top 30 offense in most metrics. And I would say when you factor in what they want to do, they're more like a top 15, top 20 offense, as you see in the efficiency. What Miami wants to do is different than what a lot of teams want to do. They want to be slow. They want to be methodical. It reminds me as a Michigan fan of the 2023 Michigan offense. I don't think it's as efficient, but it's like a Walmart, off-brand version of that, where you control clock, you suffocate opponents, you win up front, you have a quarterback who is imperfect, again with the Walmart comparison, but McCarthy was too, but he gets the job done and can sometimes create, big plays and extend drives with his legs, not just with his arm. So I have a lot of respect for Shannon Dawson and Miami's offense too. And both those hires you have to credit to Cristobal for making those, as Dawson came up from Houston. And this is his best, offensive coordinator job ever. He's doing a good job. This is Heatherman's highest profile job. He went down to get these hires. He scouted them out, found them, and they've done him well. And I imagine both of them will be back for next year, though you never know. Miami is the best ACC team in program. This should be obvious. Just is. They'd be top 2 in the SEC as well right now in terms of team. The only team who would be comparable with them would probably be Georgia, I would say. Texas, Alabama, everyone else is inferior to this Miami team. Georgia, pound for pound, you could punch with them, but I think Miami would match up well with them at the lines of scrimmage. And then they'd be top 4 in the Big Ten as a team. They would be in that, tier with Oregon. I think that, honestly, and this might anger some people, I do think all 3 of Oregon, Ohio State, and Indiana are better than this Miami team. Power ratings would agree with that, but that's an elite cast of teams right there. And the Big Ten has the best elite teams by a mile. So the fact Miami's in that conversation is impressive. And they're one of the best programs in America, too. I mean, back-to-back years with 10-plus wins. They reached the playoff this year and are on a 3-game win streak in college football playoff games with a chance to win it all. That is among one of the more impressive accomplishments of recent memory. You can only win 1 national title per year. You only have 2 teams that reach the national title per year, and Miami is one of those this year. Their lines of scrimmage, circling back to the original point we made of complementary football, are elite, and everything runs through them. Their O-line is big, it's physical, they do a good job of not allowing TFLs, of protecting Carson Beck. They have a first-round tackle in Francis Mauigoa, and Markel Bell will be drafted too. I like what I see out of that offensive line. And for the defensive line, every one of their starters and possibly every one of their backups will be drafted at some point. And I imagine Ruben Bain or one of him or Akeem Mesidor will be drafted in the first round. I can very much see that. Lines of scrimmage is Mario Cristobal's bread and butter. It was that way at Oregon too. That's why they were able to beat a team like Ohio State, who was more of a finesse team in 2021, was better than them but didn't have as good of lines of scrimmage, also had a poor defense, and Oregon got up early, took advantage of some of their inexperience, and beat that team. It's why Miami was able to beat Ohio State this year. Better lines of scrimmage, and I thought that they came in with a better game plan than Ohio State did. They beat Texas A&M, they beat Ole Miss, and all of those wins were mostly, especially I would say A&M and Ohio State due to lines of scrimmage. And Ole Miss was impressive because I thought in that game, Carson Beck, outside of a few mistakes, played at a high level, and the play calling wasn't good. That was him on offense moving the ball, not Shannon Dawson. Their coaches are studs, coordinators, assistants. They've improved so much on defense, done a good job at secondary, linebacker, D-line. Alex Mirabal is one of the best, if not the best, O-line coach in all of America. I've been impressed by their development and progression at wide receiver this year. Malachi Toney's come on strong. He's a 1,000-yard receiver. And Keelan Marion and CJ Daniels, I think, have developed nicely as the years progressed, too. All in all, it is a army of worker ants or worker bees. I think the best way to describe Miami's operation is like the operation of other great programs. It's like a colony. You have a colony of ants or bees that just, they sleep because they have to. And the minute they have any energy, they work and they expend it. They're the epitome of hard work pays off. They came in, they destroyed everything, built it from the ground up. Cristobal faced a lot of heat and a lot of pressure. And now they're at the precipice of winning their first national title since 2001. And even if they don't, Indiana's a great team. They've been a buzzsaw so far. There's no shame in losing to that team. There isn't. Would you prefer it? No. But you'll either win it all or you'll finish number 2. You're going to finish number 1 or number 2 this year. And I think Miami still has more room to grow and evolve, as we all do. So they're an impressive program. They're a great program. They are among one of the new powerhouses of the sport, and they're not going anywhere with what they do on the offensive line, the defensive line, with how they assess quarterbacks in the portal, nurture them and bring them in. And just every part of their process is setting the Hurricanes up to one day, whether next week or whether a year from now or 5 years from now or 10 years from now, because I think Cristobal will be here for a long time, it's setting them up to one day win a national championship. There's no reason to doubt Miami anymore. You can pick against them in a game. You can say they're not going to win a title in this specific year, but to doubt them as a program and to not take them seriously as a program, that would be a grave error. They are in the top 10%, top 5% of programs and teams right now. And Cristobal, look, he's a better coach than people realize, and they're going to find out really quickly if they haven't already. Now, moving on to a topic about Ohio State. Ohio State, it's fascinating to me because of how much panic there was about the portal and about all these different things. And now that they've hit on some portal guys, they've got together a high volume class with some quality, the things have swung in kind of the other direction. It went from, this team's going to go 8-4, well, to where this team's going to be like as good as the 2024 team or better than last year. And I think both takes are a little bit extreme, probably, fed by, fan passion. And I want to uncover the truth about what I think this Ohio State team is, where their program is at, what the appropriate view of the 2025 season is, and maybe what some expectations should be reasonable for 2026. There's been a ton of conjecture. There's been so much conjecture about Ohio State and how they're using the portal, how they're constructing their roster, whether or not 2025 was a success or failure. And I think so much of it, as it is often the case with these top-end programs, is so out of left field or right field, so unreasonable, that I just want to take a deep breath and dive in and express to you all what I think the truth about this program and team is. Number one, there was never a reason to think that under Ryan Day, this program was ever going to collapse or fall off in the traditional sense. And what I mean by that is they were never going to become what they were in some of the worst John Cooper years or the 2011 team. As long as Ryan Day is there, they will be a college football playoff contender at the worst. They will be a national title contender on average, if not even in their below average years, and they will win it all in their best. That will always be the case. So there was some overreaction with people, Ohio State fans included, saying, this team's going to go, they could go 8-4 next year with the schedule. They could go 7-5. And it's just, no, it's not going to happen. Now, what I will say on the other side of that that's reasonable is, hey, you go 12-2, you don't win it all, you're 0-2 against the top 10 teams you played this year in terms of final power ratings, and you lose a ton of your aliens. Your aliens in 2024, you had Caleb Downs, Sonny Styles. I would say one of Jack Sawyer or Tui Molau fit that from a college definition, and Sawyer's doing well in the pros. I would say that offensively you had Donovan Jackson, the 3 wide receivers that year, and the 2 running backs. You had like 9 aliens that year. You had them. And you had some more that were buried and didn't play as much, like Caden McDonald and Arvell Reese. You then, and then you had like Lathan Ransom and Jordan Hancock, who weren't quite aliens, although, Ransom from a college standpoint was pretty close. At least he was a stud, like the next tier down. Those kind of got halved in 2025. You had McDonald, Reese, Styles, and Downs. You had one more alien on defense, but you no longer had an alien offensive lineman. You missed your 2 alien running backs, and Jackson's not that yet. He could be, but he's not. And you only had 2 alien wide receivers compared to 3. So you went from 9 to like 6 or 5. Maybe you had even 10 in 2024, as we mentioned, with how good some of those safeties were, even though they weren't drafted high. Entering this year, unlike in 2024, where Judkins was an alien, Caleb Downs was an alien. This portal class, while good, I think, and a cause for alarmists to think more positively about things, as they should, there isn't an alien coming in, I think, unless Terry Moore is healthy, fully, and he progresses and is developed appropriately. And at the same time, you lose all 4 of your aliens on defense. I'm going to say 1 emerges because they've recruited and developed well there. And you lose an alien on offense in Carnell Tate. You bring back Jeremiah Smith. After how the O-line played this year, it'd be foolish to assume any of them would be aliens. Maybe Bo Jackson can become one. Maybe Sayin can become one, but Sayin also doesn't have the prototypical physical size and is a young player, so you may want to be cautious about that too. I think with Ohio State, that the reality about this program and team in the new era is their ceiling is the same. They can achieve all the same goals at about the same rate that they did before the new era. They can still win it all. They can still win the Big Ten. They can still go 12-0 as they did this year. They can go undefeated. They can win at a high clip. They can blow out top-end teams. They can do all those things. But the floor is lower because it is for all the top programs. Alabama has been on the precipice of 8-4, 9-3 these past few years. They went 10-2 this year, then got blown out by Georgia, blown out by Indiana. They lost 4 games. Georgia, last year, you changed maybe 2 or 3 plays, they could have gone 8-4 or 9-3. And this year it would be similar. Even though they went 11-1, you change a few plays, they go 10-2 or 9-3. And then the postseason, maybe lose your 4th game. Ohio State's not the exception to this. They're not. And how I know they're not is because the amount of aliens they had on their team this year and last year are even unusual by their own program standards. And with modern recruiting, you're not going to have that every year. You're just not going to. The athletic profile of your average Ohio State starter last year to this year will probably yet again regress because of the departures of Tate and the amount of those insane first-round NFL players on defense. You're not going to be like Michigan, where they lost that after 2023 and they fell off a cliff. But you'll be like Georgia or Alabama, where you lost those and the quality of team, dipped, and it dipped fairly noticeably. I think that is reality checkpoint number 1. This team does not have an insanely low floor. They still have the insanely high ceiling, but the floor is certainly lower. And the combination of tougher schedules for everyone in the Big Ten does not help that either. Number 2, the reality that Day had a great year, even with Texas, Penn State, and even to a certain degree Michigan disappointing, and even with the back-to-back losses to Indiana and Miami. Even with all those things, 12 wins is great. Beating your rival is great. Dominating them is great. Beating Texas is great. Going undefeated in the regular season is something that the fan base will remember. And doing it after you won a national title, when your preseason win total was 10.5. And a lot of people, myself included, flirting with picking them to go 9-3. They go 12-0. That's great. That's fantastic. It speaks to who Day is as a coach and the staff that he built. Nailing the Patricia hire was great. That was fantastic. Winning 12 games when they had that O-line, that's impressive. It's the same thing as the prior year. When Miami and Indiana, kick the living hell out of that group and make them look like children, and then you look at what they did offensively in the regular season, if that doesn't convince you that Day has brains, then you don't know football. He had a great year. Yes, it didn't end all that well, but Indiana and Miami are playing for the national title. If Indiana wins, Indiana will be a 16-0 team. They will be a buzzsaw, and you played them more competitively than anyone except for Penn State and maybe Iowa. And you played them as competitively as those teams. Just a question of whether or not you played them more competitively or less. Personally, I think you and Penn State played them about as competitively. Penn State held a lead late that they came back from. You had an opportunity to take the lead late and just couldn't do it. Miami, if they win it all, well, you'll lose to the national champion and runner-up either way. It's not a bad way to end the season. It's better than the 2013 season where they lost to a Clemson team that got annihilated by Florida State, and they lost to Michigan State. It's better than that 12-2 season, and that was a successful season in Urban Meyer's second year. So Day had a great year. Was it perfect? No. Did they fail to capitalize on what was possibly the best Buckeye defense of the 21st century or something very close to it? Yes. But I've also watched my team, Michigan, fail to win a title with their best offensive line under Jim Harbaugh. I have watched Oregon with Lanning fail to reach the postseason and lose to the same team twice with their best team in 2023. I watched Ohio State not win it all, not even play for the title game with their two best offenses under Day in 2021 and 2022. And you look at how Ohio State did against these key opponents, and look, the common thread in a lot of these was close games. During wins, they pass blocked well, they protected well, and in losses, they just did not, really. I mean, against Texas, they didn't run the ball that well, but they protected the QB well, and they won with defense and by confusing the hell out of Arch Manning. Against Michigan, they ran the ball at an okay, good level. They kept everything in front of them. They didn't make mistakes. They didn't allow pressure. Sand wasn't touched all day. And they won 27-9, dominated Michigan. Against Indiana, when they ran well, it was because Bo Jackson was churning his legs and wanted it. The O-line got destroyed most of the day. Sane got sacked 5 times. A lot of those were coverage sacks, or the running backs getting blown up, or the tackles eventually getting outmaneuvered. They also had some turnovers, just didn't run the football well. A lot was made out of using 3 or 4 tight ends, and that being a horrible thing in that game. That was the only way they were moving the football. When they had little tight end involvement, they could not pass block. And because they were trying to go deep when they didn't have those tight ends involved, they had to have extra time than a usual drop back to let the routes develop, or they had nothing underneath. So that put Sane in a very uncomfortable position. Ohio State was using those multiple tight end sets this year, guys, because their O-line couldn't do it on their own. They were not strong enough. They were not physical enough. They weren't good enough. That O-line, if you put it in Indiana's system, where you usually just have one tight end at the most, and it's RPO based, Indiana would not be winning. They would not be competing for a title if they had Ohio State's O-line. They wouldn't be. It's an average unit, and that was the crux of many of their losses. I mean, the defense didn't help against Miami either, letting them nickel and dime them to death, but that game was on the O-line more than anything else. It was on Sayin too, but if Sayin had an O-line, wouldn't have been a problem. He would have saw the field better, as he did in the regular season. He saw the field perfectly. That's an old unit. The O-line was an older unit last year. It's going to be an older unit this year. It was the crux of all their issues. And we said that preseason, and we maintained it for much of the regular season, that, hey, guys, they do not have ready NFL players on that line. And with Day's system and with how they want to attack deep, they need some NFL-ready players in the O-line to be a dominant team. And they didn't have those. And yet, in spite of that, they almost were a dominant team. So again, I think that all goes to say that the year was a success. And it shows that, Day is a good coach. He's not just a good coach. He's good by Ohio State standards, which means he's an elite coach. Units that should improve next year, based on returning production and what I've seen through the portal, a quarterback should improve, Running back should improve. Special teams with a new kicker from Baylor should improve. O-line should improve. I'm confident that special teams, running back, and quarterback will. I think the O-line should, but while I'll pick it to improve, I'm not exactly confident that it will. They never evolved throughout the year. The only time they ran the ball effectively were against defenses that were not physical. So Michigan finished with the 37th best defense per efficiency. I mean, Texas with opt-outs tore them up like it was nothing. I know Michigan had some opt-outs too, but I mean, Texas's offense was not very good for much of the year. Against defenses that were top 25, so Wisconsin, for example, definitely Indiana, definitely Miami, definitely Texas, they got aced. So I ideally wanted to see them get someone out of the portal, especially since they did lose some, not first stringers, not really even second stringers, but they did lose some depth, and they're bringing in that freshman O-line class. I'm curious to see how that unit looks next year. I'm confident it will be better, but not enough to say that it definitely will be. And I've already seen people say that, oh yeah, this O-line's going to be a beast next year. You don't know that. I'll probably have it as a top 15 unit, maybe even top 10 with returning production. But this year, it was actually worse than I thought it would be, because I did not think the defense would be that good. I did not think Sayin would be that good in terms of accuracy. I didn't even think, honestly, that Tate would be as insane as he was with 50-50 balls. I didn't. Heck, I didn't even think the running back room would be as good as it turned out to be with Bo Jackson. Like, a lot was better about Ohio State than I projected, and yet I think they were a similar overall team to what I projected them to be, because the pass blocking took a bigger step back than I thought, honestly. So be cautious there. Also, though, be cautious about, I would say, saying this team is going to massively regress. Like, you gotta look at things, gotta be calm, gotta look at things from a rational point of view. I'm confident that with Tate leaving, and they're bringing in some good receivers, so depth-wise, the receiver room should be better, but with Ohio State and how they're trying to utilize tight ends, I'm confident they're not going to use a ton of exclusive wide receiver sets unless their O-line takes a huge step forward. Same with Sayin. So in top-end talent, I think wide receiver will regress. It might be deeper. You're not going to have the two-headed monster of Tate and Smith, though. The defense as a whole, I think, will regress. Historic unit. It was up there with 2023 Michigan. It was up there with last year's Ohio State unit. Personally, would I take this unit with Patricia over those units? Probably not. Probably not. But that also plays into the fact that the last time I saw this Ohio State defense, they gave up multiple long drives due to style of play and lack of adjustments. So that might be a personal thing. I mean, numbers-wise, they're uber efficient. Numbers-wise, they're better than last year's defense. And out of all the defenses since 2020, they would be better than Georgia's in 2022. And you'd have Georgia's 2021 defense at 1, Michigan's 23 at 2. Something like that. Texas Tech's would be up there. Indiana's from this year would be up there. And you'd have this Ohio State defense up there. And then Texas is from last year. Like, it is an elite class of defenses. And losing that much first-round talent with the amount of transfers they're bringing in, the amount of guys going out, that much change, and we don't know if Patricia's going to be back. I think he will be, but we don't know. You'd expect regression at those levels, especially with Downs leaving at safety, the two stud linebackers, and the best DN, best D tackle departing. Tight end should, with Claire's absence and Kazmarek, but I don't know. They did a good job with the portal there, and corner I think is the same way. They lose Igbinosun, who was a stud, but I think Jermaine Matthews is back. Maybe I didn't get the memo that he left. And they are bringing in Cam Calhoun from Alabama, and they're bringing in a corner from Georgia. You also got Devin Sanchez, who's talented. You got Little Jr., where if you count nickel, as a corner or an extra safety, whichever, you have him there. He'll be a DB. So that should, because I think Igbinosun was their best, and they wanted I think at least one of Aaron Scott or Bryce West, they were planning on utilizing next year, and they're not going to. So that's the should improve, should regress for this team next year. Uh, just want to reiterate again with the defense. It was a historic unit with how much it's losing and how much it lost the prior year. This is a unit that will regress. It was first in points allowed per game, first in passing yards allowed per game, first in points per play, seventh in rushing yards allowed per game. I mean, this is a defense that's top 10 in every category except for takeaways and sacks. They were the perfect defense at keeping everything ahead of them, getting pressure with 4. They were high in efficiency, only behind Indiana and Texas Tech per ESPN's FPI, and they were the best scoring defense. I mean, this was a wonderful unit. It was a unit that ultimately was the reason why, even though preseason I thought that, say, Michigan was going to continue that long winning streak, it actually ended up being the reason why I picked Ohio State to win. Like, the defense is so good, I just didn't see how Michigan was going to get north of 20 points. And I thought that Ohio State would, with their edge in passing attack versus Michigan's secondary, and Day being a better coach than Moore, obviously. So I think the truth about this team is that as a program, it's as healthy as it's ever been. It is going through change. It's going to have to adapt to the new landscape of football. Will it do it at the same level that it adapted to the new landscape in the 2010s? I don't know. It's going to be very tough. But I think if anyone is going to, Day is one of the few people who would. I have absolute faith in him. I think he's a top 3 coach in college football right now. And as of right now, I would still have Ohio State as the number 1 program in college football, regardless of whether Indiana or Miami wins it all. They've just done it for so long and so consistently that I need to see more of Miami and Indiana playing for titles before I'd have either of them usurp Ohio State for that number 1 status. So top 3 coach, number 1 program, excellent defensive coordinator if you can keep him, top 5 talent roster. Look, I think Ohio State is probably going to regress as a team next year with how much they're losing defensively and the fact that the returning production on the O-line is not alien-like. The floor is probably lower than it has been before as a program, but they're going to be national title contenders. They're favorites to win it all according to some books early preseason, and my heart rate would stay the same if Ohio State won it all versus not. Like, they're just that good of a program. So the truth is, they're not collapsing, but they're also not peaking. I think their peak, at least one of their peaks, was 2024, 2023, and 2025. That 3-year stretch, probably including 2022 too, that was the peak of this program, or the period where they were peaking and on top, like, for sure. Now, I think they're probably going to enter a phase like Georgia with Smart, where after 2023, they had some things to clean up. They had to, refill parts of the foundation with new concrete, with new caulk. They had to do some in-house repairs. But I trust Day to do that, and maybe I'm wrong. I mean, this is the best program in college football after all. So we'll see. We shall see. Oregon had a fantastic 2025 season. I don't know if you would have expected me or that you yourself think that. That was a weird way. That was a weird way of segueing into that. But anyway, Oregon had a fantastic 2025 season. I don't know if you think that way. I don't know if you consistently watch this channel, if you would have expected me to have said that. But it was a fantastic year. It was a successful year. And on top of that, I also want to discuss why it should be even more successful next season. They were a top 4 team in 2025. And with Oregon, where your preseason win total was 9.5, out of Texas, Georgia, Ohio State, and Oregon, the top 4 recruiting programs, and honestly, right now, those are at least 4 of your top 6, top 5 programs, because there are some others that, if I had to really think about it, I might include in there. Oregon was expected to be the one that would regress the most out of all of them, because they had the shortest tenured coach, and honestly, there's probably some brand stuff there too, where they just did not have the same brand as the other 3. It turned out that, Oregon reloaded pretty well. Ohio State reloaded pretty well. Georgia actually improved. And it was Texas that was the one that regressed and took a step back from the prior year. I think that is what made this season successful. I could stop and end the video, and I think my point would be accurate. I mean, this is a top 4 team in 2025. Their only loss came to a team in Indiana who's 15-0 and who is being talked about as the, best coach team of all time, most impressive season in all of college football if they get it done, and a team that has posted back-to-back 30-plus point wins, 5-score wins back-to-back. On one hand, you could say that's a failure of Lanning for losing that second game and getting depanced in that way, and it is a failure. But does that one individual failure wreck the whole season? I don't think so. I don't think so one bit. They are 4th in FPI. They're 4th in efficiency. They're 2nd in FEI. I'm pretty sure that they are 3rd or 4th in S&P Plus. This is a top 4 team, and they're probably underrated a tad bit in power ratings or properly rated because of the scope of the loss, despite the fact that if those teams played each other again, the average would not be Indiana winning by 34 points. Their lines of scrimmage were elite too. So the offensive line, they lost a ton. Lost to Johnny Cornelius and Josh Connerly, both tackles after 2024. They reloaded on the line, bringing in Emmanuel Pregnon, bringing in Alex Harkey, Isaiah World. Was it perfect? No, but what position is even the best? And Iapani Lololu did well at center, and he's coming back next year. They also showcased some young talent when some of their starters went down in injuries, especially in that USC game. And defensively, I mean, this defense is night and day better than it was last year. Talking about Tatum Tuioti and Mateo Uyunglele with Bear Alexander and Amari Washington, they don't have the same talent at D-tackle right now, starting-wise, that they did last year. And they improved. Their run defense was better. Their pass defense was better. Their linebacker and secondary play took massive steps forward. But just focusing on the offensive line and the defensive line, I really liked what I saw out of their ability to create explosive runs, to get to the second level, and defensively to just keep everything in front of them. They didn't get a ton of sacks, didn't get a ton of TFLs, but they did do a great job, stopping offenses in their tracks and keeping everything in front of them, being fundamentally sound. And I was impressed, not just by their starters, but by their depth at those positions. Their offense was effective, finished 6th in ESPN's efficiency ratings. And just to dive in deeper with some of the numbers, you got the 13th best offense in points per game, an offense that was 22nd in rushing yards per game, 35th in passing yards per game, 8th in points per play. It was a very explosive unit. They were 13th in both yards per carry and yards per pass attempt. They only allowed 19 sacks all year, and honestly, a lot of those were on Moore not getting the ball out quickly enough. They were 50th in season turnovers, surrendering 15 of them offensively. And again, they were 6th in ESPN's efficiency. Will Stein caught a lot of crap this year for both Indiana games. I'll just read you some of Indiana's stats defensively. Indiana has 45 sacks, 18 turnovers. They have 11 fumble recoveries. The Hoosiers are 2nd in scoring defense. They are 2nd in ESPN's FPI. And when you look at points per play allowed, Indiana is 3rd. They allow 0.199 points per play. Last year, you had no defense that allowed less than 1/5 of a point per play. This year, Indiana is one of those, along with Texas Tech and Ohio State. So Bryant Haynes in Indiana might just have an elite defense that's better and has a better system and better starting players than Will Stein's offense has had. And in that case, that's not completely Will Stein's fault. Looking at the defense here, it was a physical unit. They were 6th in ESPN's efficiency ratings. They were among one of the most productive in America. And what I loved about this defense is I've been very critical of Lupoy. And I still don't think Lupoy is this elite defensive coordinator. But one thing Lupoy is excellent at is recruiting and evaluation and development. And Tony Tuioti has done a phenomenal job developing on the defensive line. That's why so many of their backups went in the portal and are entertaining offers from good schools, because he's a great developer, recruiter, and coach. It all starts with Oregon up front, with the size of their D line, with its NFL talent. Linebacker was the weakness of this unit, along with, I would say, half of the secondary. Theron Johnson, Ife Obadegwu, Aaron Flowers, all of whom, except for Johnson, are young players, by the way, were, iffy. Brandon Finney Jr., despite being a freshman, was playing at an All-American level. The only way you beat him is over the top with someone who's as fast as he is and bigger. So literally Charlie Becker. That's how you beat Brandon Finney, is Charlie Becker. Like, on that play where Becker had that long touchdown, the only thing Finney could have done differently is not getting beat off the line of scrimmage. That's the only thing he could have done better, and that would have required the play to be different, the coverage to be different, and even then Becker's taller than him, and Becker is one of the fastest receivers in the country. He's a state track champion. There's not much you can do there. I talked about it with Nate Bishop of Scoop Duck. I think a lot of that game in the Peach Bowl was mistakes, but also Indiana just being that good when you make mistakes. And while you should never burn film, I think to a certain degree you can trust your process moving forward and say, hey, we got to figure out this postseason stuff, but overall our foundation is strong. These are just issues that we have to tweak, things we have to fix. We don't have to break everything down and rebuild it. I mean, the defense was 11th in points allowed per game. They were a top-end passing defense. Their rushing defense was only outside the top 25 in yards allowed per game because they didn't get a ton of TFLs. They don't have a lot of line yards defensively. And again, their linebackers were great, but not elite. But overall, it was probably still a top 15 run defense. And I would say a top 10 pass defense. Yards per attempt was low. Yards per carry was low. They didn't get that many sacks either. Just 43rd in America with 30. Only had 21 takeaways too. It was a very effective defense. Loved what it did against Texas Tech. I actually loved what it did against Indiana the first time. Just from a standpoint of, I think they got away with some offsides, away with delay of games, with the stemming, and away with some PIs. But if the refs aren't going to call it, you don't change the game plan. And they did a good job limiting Indiana on the lines of scrimmage in that first game too. They also did a good job at beating Iowa and Penn State at their own games, not just offensively, but defensively too. So that was impressive. And finally, Oregon had several credibility games, several credibility tests that I think ultimately they passed. That's kind of what I'm thinking here. I know Penn State finished 7-6, but they were a top 15 team in final power ratings. They outgained them 424 to 276. They won TOP, they won pressure, they won fourth down, they won third down. That game shouldn't have been a 30-24 overtime win. And that is part of Oregon's issues with adjustments and coaching, and even to a certain degree the defense, that they really dominated that game, and yet Penn State could have come back and put it among the all-time chokes of the 2025 season. If Penn State won that game, Oregon blew it, that would have been up there in the chokes of the year for sure. But Oregon didn't do that. They went on the road into a hostile environment, into a Penn State team that is better than their record shows, and was better in September than they are now, or when they were in November, even when they were finally winning again. Penn State was at their best in this game and in September, and Oregon came in and kind of ruined their program. Indiana, round one. It broke Oregon's home game win streak, but in all hindsight, this game was not bad at all. With who Indiana is now, and I know they're probably better now than they were then, but even then, they were healthier on the D-line, their defense was doing well, offense was doing well. They came off a gutsy win over Iowa, and they blew out Illinois by over 50 points. This was not that bad with hindsight. This is a game that, along with Lanning's wins over Penn State last year and Ohio State last year, obviously this not being as impressive as those, honestly kind of checks the box for me. Where it's a loss, And Indiana probably should have won by more than 10. But the fact you kept it close with this team in a year that many thought would be your rebuild year, look, it's not as impressive as what Indiana is doing, but it's impressive. And what Oregon did this year, it's not as impressive as what IU is doing, but what no one is doing is as impressive as what IU did. Even if IU loses to Miami, and they might, they still had the most impressive year relative to preseason expectations, relative to talent. Oregon's up there among teams where they reloaded as good as Ohio State, as good as Georgia. I mean, they were one of the few programs to reload and get better, probably, or stay about the same from last year to this year, because this year I think was a weaker year in football than even last year was, and last year was a pretty weak year. So, not too bad, though a loss stings. This game was scary, 18-16 over Iowa, but Oregon once again won the yards battle. They won the rushing yards battle by quite a bit. They won sacks. They lost TOP, but they had a very off game. Like, Moore had one of his worst games QBR-wise. Still made the throws at the end to put him in field goal range for the win. Much like the Penn State game, this game probably should have been more one-sided than it was, but due to the road environment and some things that were inherent about this Oregon team, just some inherent facts, some DNA things, they couldn't pull away. And you see this a lot. You do. This is an impressive win, though, because they could beat Iowa at their own game. They ran the ball well, though not perfect. They did struggle in the red zone. They beat Iowa at special teams, and it was a good win against an Iowa team that honestly was top 15 at the end of the year. This is another game where they just couldn't pull away. Oregon, we picked it, and we were not perfect. We were right that Oregon would win. We were right that they would cover. We were wrong at the scope of the win. On College Football with Sam, I told my viewers in this game that I thought that Oregon would basically name the score. And they would do to USC what Texas Tech did to BYU and kind of a microcosm of what Indiana did to Illinois. They could have, in watching that game. USC hit the 50-50 balls. They hit the trick plays. Oregon called one of the dumbest attempts at a tush push I've ever seen. They gave USC field position, and USC still couldn't capitalize off it. You name it. They won total yards. They won the rushing yard battle. They suffered a zillion injuries and still won by 15. Won TOP, won the pressure battle, forced USC into several fourth downs because they won third down. And Oregon also had tons of penalties, which both teams were highly penalized. But Oregon had more yards, more total penalties, and that's more characteristic of USC than Oregon, in my opinion, the lack of discipline. Shout out to Trojan Blade, by the way, who, no, this is a segment, but he's in the chat, major channel, USC. I love that he's a fan of my work. I'm a fan of his work too. Go over to his channel and check his stuff out. I think he would back up what I'm saying about USC. Don't know for sure, but I've heard the rants, I've heard the rambles, and understandably so, very good ones at that, about this USC team and how they couldn't get out of their own way. Oregon was a Walmart version of that, where they just, at times this year, could not widen the lead when it felt like it was so obvious they should have. You get to the Orange Bowl, and we're not going to talk about this for more than 10 seconds. I mean, quarterback was the difference here. Dante Moore way better than Brycen Moore. Oregon in general, their roster better than Texas Tech's. I think Texas Tech had the better defensive roster. Linebacker, D-line, maybe parts of the secondary, and Tech had the better defense. But when Oregon actually has offense in the matchup and you don't, it's going to result in a blowout. Dan Lanning, he had several questionable fourth downs. And again, going back to that theme of they should have pulled away earlier, and they didn't due to things that are coded in their DNA. But they won 23-0, and it was an impressive win. Last but not least, despite winning total yards, which is fake, by the way, if Indiana had to win total yards, they would have won it in this game. They were better. 9 times out of 10, Oregon and IU take the field and play due to matchups, due to coaching, due to all different things. Indiana wins 9 times out of 10 on the average day. Some cases they win by this much. Other cases they win by a field goal or a touchdown. Others they repeat the 10-point win. All of Oregon's issues that were coded in their DNA, the inability to consistently run for 4 or 5 yards per carry, to make long drives and not relying on explosives, the inability of Dante Moore to read coverages perfectly, the inability of the tackles to perform at an elite level consistently, and the inability of the defense to consistently get pressure or TFLs, and the proclivity of this team to cough up the ball due to strip sacks, due to Dante Moore throwing an interception under pressure, all those things, and the secondary, while being wonderful and talented, still being young enough to be got by the best wide receiver groups. All of it came together at once, and Indiana had a great game plan and played well as well. And that ended up being a 34-point loss for Oregon. That was bad, for sure, and Lanning has to find a way to correct that, because it's happened 2 years in a row now where their season has ended with emphatic blowouts. But I'm confident that this program is going in the right direction. I think this team will be better in 2026 than they were in 2025, returning most of the core supporting cast and quarterback. And you also have to account for preseason expectations and where people thought this Oregon team would be. Few thought they would win 13 games, and they did, just like they won last year. And much like last year, where the only thing they lost to was a buzzsaw, and they beat them in the regular season, this team didn't have a win against the buzzsaw like last year's team did, but they lost to a buzzsaw twice. So all they have to do is get that next step and jump in that next tier. They are only one tier away from being the best team in America, and there can only be one of those. So in my humble opinion, for all it's worth, I think Oregon had success this year, and next year, or maybe next year is this year now that Oregon season is over, they're going to have success again. Now we can talk about Texas Tech, and man, am I starving. Am I starving. But let's talk about Texas Tech. And look, with the Red Raiders, I just think they're kind of a... With the Red Raiders, I just think they're a quarterback away. Texas Tech is so close to competing for national championships. In truth, I just think they're a quarterback away and an offensive line that's more cohesive and a little bit older away from being a true national title contender. That's all they needed in 2025 with that defense. And while I don't believe they're going to totally reload on defense because they had a plethora of studs on that unit up front, all across the D line, at least they returned Bryce Pullock, and I think are going to get good portal additions on defense again. Their offense should be so much better with Brennan Sorsby and with what they bring in the portal and another year with both coordinators. Remember, last year was the first year of both the offensive coordinator and the defensive coordinator. This will be year 2, so they'll have a staff continuity edge compared to what they had last year. And they will have tasted their own blood by having their teeth punched out by Oregon. That can help a program, too, assess where they're at and where they need to get better. Tech is so close because of their elite defense. In many metrics, they were the best defense in America this year. Really, those metrics were just ESPN's FPI and the amount of explosive defensive plays they had. But in other metrics, at worst, they were the third best defense or the second best defense. Them, Indiana, and Ohio State unanimously have the top 3 defenses. Maybe Miami can kind of enter that conversation, but with a 16-game sample size and 15 games already played, those defenses will be unanimously the 3 best. At all 3 levels, but especially up front, this Texas Tech defense has been fantastic. They were 3rd in points per play allowed, allowing 12.2, and that was with an offense that was inferior to Ohio State's and inferior to Indiana's, and by quite a bit, actually. Their rushing offense wasn't really better than Ohio State's. Their passing offense was obviously inferior, and rushing and passing, they were worlds apart from where Indiana was in both of those categories. They were 1st in rushing as allowed per game, in part because they were 6th in season sacks, despite only playing 14 games, while Miami, who's 1st there, has played in 15 games, will play in a 16th game too. They only allowed 2.2 yards per carry, and man, what they did to Oregon, because they didn't get to Dante Moore a ton, they only sacked him, I think, 2 times. What they did up front to that rushing attack was bananas. I mean, that rushing defense, I thought part of it was a paper tiger. It was not a paper tiger at all. Like, that was a totally legit, accurate run defense. The numbers, despite the weaker strength of schedule, were not manipulative. They were not fake, faux, anything. That was a legit defense. And they were second in points per play allowed, only allowing 0.177, which no defense last year allowed that few points per play. And they were first in ESPN's efficiency and first in season takeaways with 32. Sheil Wood, congratulations to him, and congratulations to James Blanchard, their general manager, for, getting David Bailey, getting Romello Height, getting AJ Holmes, getting Lee Hunter. I forget their defensive tackle who was injured, who was their best D tackle. Name escapes me, didn't play. Oh, Skylar Jill Howard. Congratulations for getting him. And for retaining, Rodriguez and Roberts, getting Bryce Pollock out of the portal. He constructed that roster along with the coordinators and the head coach. He's one of the best GMs, maybe the best GM in college football. And he plays into their team talent being good. So the Red Raiders have developed well. They've recruited well. They're stepping up in those categories as a program. And they're scouting to pan out the way they did in 2025 with that portal class. That's elite scouting right there. So whoever their head of scouting is, whoever is in charge of that department, is a highly intelligent, cerebral, wonderful man. And someone who's definitely patient too. Texas Tech has all the money in the world. They've certainly earned prestige after this year. And yet they've gone for a lot of guys that aren't highly rated in services and that were not blue chippers at a high school. They're going for, as Signetti says, production over potential. And at this point in college football, with, we still have the red shirt. We have 5 years. We have, in some cases, 6 years with medical red shirts. And with the transfer portal especially, you can recruit off of production more than potential, more than ever before. Because high school to college is a big jump. That is literally recruiting for potential. And to a certain degree, production, depending on the strength of your high school schedule and who you play up against. But it's a lot more hit and miss because there are so many more high schools and high school football players. There's just a ton of variance there. Their scouting and strategy and assessment is top tier in those regards. Something else that's important, this is where Miami and Texas Tech, I would call renegade rogue programs. They are the villains of college football. Not that they're a negative for the sport. I think Jimbo Fisher and Texas A&M being the villains of college football, or trying to be, because really they weren't all that menacing. They were just cute dog that's incredibly annoying and poops and pees everywhere, but just has a rich owner, so we can't take it out back and do what needs to be done until the wealth goes away, and then you can. That was Jimbo Fisher and Texas A&M. If somehow they would have been successful, that would have been bad for the sport, because Jimbo Fisher's just this epitome of toxicity. That's not what I'm saying when I talk about Texas Tech and Miami being villains. I'm talking about in the role they play. The Big Ten and the SEC, winning those conferences ain't guaranteed. Now, to be fair, the ACC nor Big 12 is either, because any given Saturday, and Miami, despite being the best program in the ACC, might win a national title before they even win the conference they reside in, which is just peak 12-team college football playoff. But they have an edge over the rest of their conferences and are several tiers ahead of the rest of their conferences. So they have an easier path to the playoffs than teams in the Big Ten and the SEC under current rules. They do. They have an easier path. And for Texas Tech, owning the Big 12 under the current structure, that's going to quickly improve their prestige. That's going to make them respected because they'll have won the Big 12 4 or 5 times in a row, or 4 out of the last 5 years in the future. And they're going to be a factory for professional football players with the portal and how they develop the players once they get on campus and the positions they put them in. That's going to help them get to the playoffs nearly every year, if not every year. And then from there, it's whether or not they can win it all or how far can they go with their current roster. They're simply a quarterback away. That's all they are. And Sorsby will help a lot, and I mean a lot, in that category. Sorsby is going to make them a probably better team next year. I'd imagine they'll be better next year than this year, or at least they'll reload and be about the same. I don't think they have anywhere to go but up next year in power ratings very early. They probably have some mobility to go down, but I don't know if I'll pick them to. Because unlike Indiana this year, Indiana, much better quarterback play, just really better everywhere except for defensive line, obviously, and they might be losing more production. There's just going to be a little bit more turnover at a school that is 10, points better than Texas Tech, and probably more than that when you factor in matchups, to where odds say those programs will probably converge with similar talent and similar results they had on defense, and now Texas Tech's getting a better quarterback. If that makes sense, maybe that was very confusing. Sorsby will help a lot. Just think Texas Tech's a quarterback away, maybe improving a bit in the O-line away, and I think they will do that entering next year, and we'll see if they're in the title conversation. Now, Alabama. The Alabama Crimson Tide need major changes entering 2026. These videos were made en masse after the Rose Bowl, and I probably should have made it then too, but here I am, and I want to discuss now what I think needs to be done, or at least identify what the problem is. Try it. DeBoer is at a major fork in the road. The Kalen DeBoer era at Alabama, I think, is at a crisis point, if not close to it. Does that mean he's on the hot seat? No. Does that mean that he ought to be fired? No. Does this mean if they want to compete for titles that they need to make some structural changes? Not destroy the foundation and level it, but make some structural and cosmetic changes. I absolutely agree with that. Alabama's offensive line this year was awful. It sucked. It was the most disappointing O-line in terms of talent assembled that we've had all season long, and maybe over the past few years. Ohio State didn't have a BCR above 50% on their offensive line once you factored in transfers in and transfers out. Didn't have that. And they lost a first-round projected tackle and didn't really replace him with a first-rounder. So with Ohio State, I gave a lot of grace there with the O-line. Like, hey, do not expect this thing to be any better than a top 25 O-line, because you will be disappointed. And everyone who thought it was disappointed. And I still have people, who said that line was going to be Joe Moore Award caliber and, thrashed me for it. And they've, never told me I was right. But out of many things that I've been wrong on, that I was right on. I did not think Alabama's O-line was going to be elite either, if I'm being honest. I did not think that way. I thought that they would be good, great, probably better than Ohio State's. But a lot of that had to do with the fact that they had superior talent, and Proctor was projected to be a first-rounder, and I liked what Brailsford did at Washington when he had to step in. But they were actually worse. At least Ohio State could occasionally get a good run block going. At least against some very inferior competition, they could pass block okay. Alabama couldn't do any of that at all. I mean, Proctor gave up pressure after pressure. He'd get sat on his butt. They could never get a yard after the lines of scrimmage on initial contact. That Indiana Rose Bowl was amongst one of the more emasculating games I've ever witnessed for a program, for a blue blood program. It was Alabama's worst loss since 1998. The O-line was a big part of the reason why that loss happened, why the Georgia loss in the SEC title happened, and why the team really fell apart as the year went on. Teams figured them out because they couldn't run the ball, because they were one-dimensional. Whether you got to fire Chris Kaplovich or you got to hire an assistant, something's got to change. Man, something has to change on the offensive line for Alabama. It just has to. It's not acceptable to be that bad on the offensive line at Iowa or at Nebraska or at Minnesota or at Arkansas or Kentucky or Vanderbilt, let alone at Alabama. Are there going to be any coordinator changes? I'd be inclined to say probably not, since we're a few weeks removed from that game. I don't think Alabama will have coordinator changes or even many staff changes, although they probably should have at least some staff changes. I don't know how necessary the coordinator changes are. I mean, when your O-line is that bad, does it matter what Ryan Grubb calls? Does it matter what Kalen DeBoer calls? You can't go total air raid with who Simpson is as a quarterback and those receivers and the pass blocking. You can't do that. That O-line was so bad that it put a permanent cap on, what could and couldn't be done. And then for defense, I like Kane Womack. The defense in back-to-back seasons has been top 10 in efficiency. Do they struggle at, shutting down the run? Sure. Did they get depantsed against Indiana? Yes, I would say so. But Indiana had the best offense. Georgia had a top 5 offense, I would say. And this is a defense that I think has done wonderful in the secondary, good at linebacker, and I think D-line, Alabama just hasn't done a great job developing there. I don't know if that's a DeBoer thing, if that was a Saban thing at the end, if it's a specific position coach. I don't know how necessary coordinator changes are, but let me know what you think in the comment section below. Alabama needs to adapt to the times as well. They need better scouting, better development, and they need to recruit production over potential in some instances. They don't need to, again, completely change their identity, but they need to change some things because they're still recruiting high school at a high level, just like they were under Saban, and they're still producing these teams that are underperforming their talent index. They did that in 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. This is like the 4th year in a row, where Alabama has underperformed their talent index, I would say. So they need to adapt to the times there because something's up at a program like Alabama for you to regress despite how you're recruiting and the talent you have. Because I've seen Ty Simpson play and be effective. I've seen Alabama's defense look really effective and slow down a very effective, efficient Vanderbilt offense to 14 points. They also need to bring back elite defense. So Alabama has not had a top 4 defense in ESPN's efficiency since 2017, going on nearly 10 years of not having an elite defense. They've had some near elite units, some great units. They've not had an elite defense, though. That needs to be brought back, especially in the now meta of college football, where possessions are longer, games are shorter, defenses have caught up to a lot of offensive schemes, and you're introducing disguised coverages, simulated pressures more. Defenses are becoming more complex and responding to the complex and, cheat code offenses of the 2010s. So Alabama needs that. And then last but not least, they need a change in identity, and not program identity in the sense of, completely flipping from where they were under Saban, but they don't really have an identity right now. It doesn't feel like it. They're not good at running the ball. They're not good at stopping the run. Their pass defense, while has a lot of NFL players and is good, is not the most effective. And their passing offense really got shut down in the later portion of the season. I don't feel like they have any offensive identity. I don't know what their defensive identity is. Again, they don't need to destroy the foundation, that type of identity change, but they need to, repair some holes in the drywall. They need to fix the furnace. They need to paint the living room. They need to make sure the cabinets match and are sanded down so you don't get splinters. They need to, cover the corners of their countertops so the kids don't fall and crack their heads, as they did twice this year against Georgia and Indiana. They need changes. I don't know exactly what those are, but there are obviously problems, and I think there are certain causes for the problems that can be fixed, and a great program will fix those. Essentially, Alabama is at a fork in the road that decides whether or not they want to be a good program or a great program. Alrighty. We're almost done with that segment, and then, wow. So Darian Mensah entered the portal, I guess is what we're hearing, right? Darian Mensah entered the portal. That's what I'm seeing. Yeah, Mensah just hit the portal. Mario has done it again. Yes, he has. If he's entering the portal, there's only one place he can go, and that's Miami. You know what that means, right? That means Miami's going to have a top 10 quarterback next year because Darian Mensah is better than Carson Beck. Mensah was second in America in passing yards and touchdowns and top 20 in QBR. Um, if Mensah were playing for Miami this entire season and they were playing IU in the national title game, maybe I'm wrong here, but I think the number for Indiana would be under 7. I think it'd be like 6.5, maybe 7.5, but it would not be 8.5, and there'd be no 9s out there. Like he's worth a whole point, maybe 2, maybe even 3 over Carson Beck. He's a better quarterback, so that's a huge get if he ends up going to Miami. That is a huge, huge get. Need to take another intermission to quickly get some water here, but I will be right back after getting that. Oh, sorry. Forgot to mute myself. Hey guys, so we're going to cut it. It's already at 3 hours. I didn't want to go past 3 hours. I'm a little bit burned out, and I already have the rest of these segments prepared, so I can just record them on my own. We will... I know we didn't talk too much about the transfer portal, and that was meant to be saved for the end. But you guys, you know my channel, you're subscribed, you like. The clips will be out. The clips will be out tonight or tomorrow morning. So we're gonna close this stream down. And yeah, we'll see you Monday on Monday's show. So thank you guys for watching, and also the Indiana and Georgia topics, which I did not get to, those will be out today / tomorrow. So we'll see you guys very soon. Have a good day.